The mind can fabricate memories so vividly that they become indistinguishable from real ones. There are moments when something feels so real in your memory, so textured, detailed, and emotionally charged that it's hard to believe it never happened. A conversation, a childhood event, a smell that takes you back to a room you swear existed. But here's the unsettling truth. The mind can invent memories with such precision and depth that even under close inspection, they look, feel, and behave just like real experiences. And you'll swear on them, you'll argue over them, you'll build your identity around them. But they never happened. This isn't just a glitch, it's a feature. The brain isn't a video recorder, it's a storyteller, an artist, a puzzle solver with missing pieces. When the full picture isn't available, the mind fills in the gaps with its best guesses, drawing from emotions, past experiences, and cultural scripts. It doesn't just guess logically, it paints emotionally. If the memory feels right, the brain accepts it as truth. False memories often begin with a seed, a story someone told, a photograph you glanced at, a dream that lingered too long, and then your mind begins layering on details. You remember the color of the walls, the tone in someone's voice, what you wore, how you felt. Each layer makes the memory feel more real, and by the time it's complete, it's no longer a guess. It's a piece of your truth. And the scariest part? You'll defend it like it's sacred. Studies have shown people confidently recall events that never occurred, swearing they were lost in a mall as children, or met a celebrity they never actually saw. Entire groups can share collective false memories, a phenomenon now widely recognized as the Mandela effect. What this means is that even shared reality can be distorted by the fragile architecture of memory. Your emotional brain plays a starring role in this illusion. The more emotional a false memory becomes, the stronger it sticks. Trauma, joy, love, fear, these become the glue that binds the illusion to your identity. And once emotion claims it, the rational mind stops questioning it. So when you look back at your life, understand this. Not every memory is a fact. Some are poetry written by a brain desperate for coherence, belonging, and meaning. And sometimes the stories it tells are so good, they overwrite the truth entirely. Thoughts can trigger the same physical pain as actual injuries. There are wounds that never bleed, yet they throb. Thoughts, silent and invisible, can cut deeper than knives and ache longer than broken bones. What most people don't realize is that the brain processes emotional pain and physical pain in nearly the same way. To the mind, rejection and a broken leg aren't just metaphorically similar, they light up the same neural pathways. Heartache isn't poetic exaggeration, it's literal suffering. When a person recalls a betrayal, a humiliation, or the death of someone they loved, the brain reacts as if the body were under attack. The anterior cingulate cortex, which registers the distress of physical injury, becomes active. The same neurochemical alarm bells go off. Cortisol floods the bloodstream. The heart rate changes, muscles tense. The pain feels as real as any wound, even though nothing visible has happened. This is why the memory of an argument can ruin an entire day, why the thought of someone's absence can steal sleep, dull appetite, and drain strength. The mind doesn't distinguish between past and present when it replays trauma. A thought becomes an event, a memory becomes a reenactment, and your body becomes the battlefield. What makes this more disturbing is that emotional pain often lasts longer. You can splint a broken bone, wrap it in gauze, and watch it heal. But when pain comes from the mind, when it's tied to identity, loss, guilt, or shame, there's no cast to put it in, no visual reminder that healing is underway. Instead, thoughts spiral. They replay like looping sirens. The same hurt reactivates over and over until it feels fresh, even years later. Some people experience psychogenic pain, where their thoughts alone cause physical symptoms like backaches, migraines, even paralysis. The pain is real, the suffering is real, but it begins in the shadows of thought. This isn't weakness, it's wiring. It's the way the mind was built to feel deeply, to remember vividly, to protect obsessively. Understanding this changes how pain is seen. It reveals that healing isn't just about the body, it's about the stories being told silently in the mind. And sometimes the most urgent wounds are the ones no one else can see. The brain often decides before the conscious mind believes it made a choice. You think you choose, you think you weigh options, consider consequences, and come to a logical conclusion. But in truth, the decision was already made, milliseconds, even seconds, before you became aware of it. The conscious mind is often the narrator, not the driver. It watches the show and believes it's the director. In a series of eerie studies, neuroscientists found that the brain lights up with decision-making activity before people report making a choice. In some cases, brain scans could predict what a person would choose up to 7 seconds before they consciously decided. The mind was already steering left before the driver thought about turning. What feels like free will may be post-production commentary. This doesn't just apply to trivial decisions like what to eat or what button to push. It ripples into moral choices, snap judgments, emotional reactions, everything that makes a person feel like an autonomous being, and it shatters the comforting illusion that consciousness is always in control. The unconscious mind is a fast and silent strategist. It weighs thousands of variables beneath awareness. It pulls from experience, fear, instinct, and pattern recognition. By the time the conscious self chooses, the decision has already passed through hidden gates. What's left is the story that justifies it. This disconnect becomes most obvious during moments of confusion. Ever said yes before knowing why, or felt dread without understanding the source? The body reacts, the decision forms, and only later does the mind build a reason around it. This is the illusion of ownership. It's like a child sitting in a moving car, holding the toy steering wheel, believing it's guiding the ride. But this isn't necessarily bad. The unconscious is incredibly efficient. It handles complexity that would overwhelm conscious thought. It's why instinct can save a life before fear kicks in, why first impressions often carry truth. But it also means that self-awareness is a lagging process. People explain their behavior after the fact, convinced it came from a place of reason, when it came from somewhere much older, deeper, and hidden. What does this say about free will, about identity, about responsibility? Maybe that the you think you are is only part of the story, and the rest is unfolding behind the curtain, faster than thought and without your permission. Silence is interpreted differently by every brain. Some hear it, some feel it. Silence is not the absence of sound, it is the presence of something else, something more intimate, more revealing. And strangely, every mind touches it differently. For some, silence hums like a low frequency, a subtle static behind the eyes. Others feel it as weight, like the room just got heavier, a pressure, a stillness, a shift in the air. Some people hear it like a tone, others sense it like a presence. What science has uncovered is that silence isn't processed in just the auditory parts of the brain. It spreads, it lights up emotional centers, memory circuits, even spatial awareness regions. When there's nothing external to listen to, the brain turns inward, and what it finds depends entirely on who it belongs to. To the anxious mind, silence can feel like a scream, a demand to act, to speak, to fill the void. It triggers the nervous system to scan for threats. What's wrong? Who's judging? Why is no one talking? But for the reflective mind, silence is sanctuary. It's where truth whispers, where thoughts can be heard without interruption. The same quiet can be peace or panic depending on the brain that hears it. Some people fill silence with imagined noise. Internal monologues grow louder. Past conversations resurface. Regrets replay. The silence becomes a theater for memory, worry, fantasy. The louder the inner world, the more unbearable the outer quiet. That's why some can't sleep without background noise, not because they dislike silence, but because they fear what it reveals. Others seek silence like a drug. Monks, artists, thinkers, they train their minds to find the signal in the silence, the patterns behind the stillness. To them, silence isn't emptiness. It's full of subtle rhythms, half-thoughts, fleeting insights. They don't just hear silence, they listen to it. They feel it wrap around their mind like a soft, invisible blanket. And then there are those who never feel silence at all. People with tinnitus, those with trauma. For them, silence is an idea they can't touch. Even in the quietest room, there's a noise in their head that never leaves. So the next time silence falls, notice what your brain does with it. Does it retreat? Does it race? Does it bloom? Because silence isn't universal. It's a mirror, and what reflects back might be the most honest sound you've ever heard. You can experience a color in your mind that doesn't exist in the visible spectrum. There are colors the eyes will never see, but the mind can. Colors that sit outside the rainbow, that break the rules of vision, that exist not in the world, but somewhere behind the eyes. These are called forbidden colors, shades created by the brain that don't exist in nature's palette, and yet some people can see them, not through the eyes, through the mind itself. The visible spectrum, the world of reds, blues, and greens, is just a narrow slice of electromagnetic reality. But within the brain, colors don't need to follow the rules of light waves. The mind can blend wavelengths that cancel each other out in physical reality. It can create experiences like reddish green or yellowish blue, colors that shouldn't be possible, and yet, in carefully controlled settings, people have reported seeing them, not metaphorically, not spiritually, literally. This happens when the eyes are tricked into sending opposing color signals to the brain at the same time. The result is an experience the brain doesn't quite know how to handle, so it invents a color, something new, something with no name, and once seen, it lingers in the memory like a dream, real but unreachable. But this isn't limited to optical experiments. People with synesthesia, whose senses cross-wire, sometimes report colors linked to emotions, sounds, or letters that don't exist in the physical world. A voice might feel shimmering copper. The number 3 might glow with a shade no painter could mix. These aren't hallucinations. They're internal realities, the mind painting outside the lines. Even in dreams, people often see colors that don't translate to waking language. They wake up trying to describe a purple that wasn't purple, a gold that was warmer than gold, a hue that shimmered like a secret. The brain, untethered from the eye's limitations, becomes its own artist. This ability hints at something profound. That perception isn't bound by what the world offers. It's bound by what the brain allows. And sometimes the mind allows more than the world contains. Hidden inside everyone is a private spectrum, a gallery of impossible shades, a silent reminder that reality, as it's known, is only one version of what's possible. The mind will finish other people's sentences even if they're wrong. The brain is obsessed with patterns. It doesn't wait. It predicts. When someone starts a sentence, your mind rushes ahead, trying to complete it before they do. Sometimes out of excitement, sometimes out of impatience, but always because of one thing. The brain craves certainty. This isn't about understanding someone. It's about staying one step ahead, building safety through anticipation. Even if that anticipation is completely wrong, this predictive instinct is rooted in survival. Long before language, humans depended on reading the environment, animal movements, shifting winds, expressions on other faces. Predicting what came next meant living through another day. So now, when a friend starts to say, "You know what really bothers me about," your brain doesn't wait to hear the rest. It fills in the blank. Authority, traffic, that person from work, you've already decided whether you're right or not. And it doesn't stop at words. It stretches into intention. You hear someone pause mid-sentence, and your brain not only guesses what they were going to say, it tells you why they were going to say it. It decides their motive, their mood, their meaning. But sometimes your brain's prediction is a mirror of your own fears or expectations. It isn't what they meant. It's what you feared they would mean. This is why misunderstandings happen even in close relationships. You finish someone's sentence not just aloud, but in your mind, and then react emotionally to a version of them that never existed. You argue with what you thought they were going to say. You feel hurt by a conclusion they never reach. People have ended friendships, destroyed trust, and missed moments of connection because their minds jumped to the wrong ending. They thought they were mind readers, but they were really just story builders, desperate for completion, terrified of uncertainty. In moments of tension, this instinct gets stronger. The mind fills in threats where there are none. It rewrites pauses as accusations. It finishes silences as insults. And what's worse, once the brain commits to a prediction, it resists correction. Even if the person clarifies, "That's not what I meant," your mind often clings to its version. It believes its story more than their truth. This is the mind's paradox. It's brilliant at detecting meaning, yet blind when that meaning isn't what it expected. Your brain edits out parts of reality every second to keep your sense of normal. Reality isn't delivered, it's curated. Every second, the brain receives billions of bits of sensory information, far more than it can process. So it cuts, it trims, it deletes, not just noise or clutter, but entire moments, sensations, shifts in color, even movements. It does this to protect a fragile illusion that the world is stable and that you are in control. This filtering happens so smoothly that it's almost impossible to notice. When your eyes dart from one place to another, the brain blacks out vision during the movement, leaving milliseconds of blindness. You don't notice. When something enters your peripheral vision, it might fade out if your brain decides it's irrelevant. You don't notice. When you're speaking to someone and a distant siren wails, the brain may choose to dim that sound entirely. Again, you don't notice. What's truly unsettling is that this editing isn't always logical. It's emotional. If something doesn't match your expectations or beliefs, your brain might suppress it. If a face looks almost familiar, your mind may convince you you've seen it before. If a person's words contradict your worldview, your brain might distort their tone or even your memory of what they said. The mind doesn't want accuracy, it wants continuity. This is why two people can live through the same event and recall it completely differently. The brain fills in gaps with assumptions, biases, and emotional coloring. It invents memories, distorts timelines, and rewrites sensory data to make the experience feel smooth, familiar, manageable. Reality is reassembled every moment into a version you can live with. Even things like your own nose, constantly in your field of vision, are ignored. The brain has determined that it's not useful, so it erases it. Shadows, flickers, slight shifts in lighting, all quietly deleted. You live inside an edited film, not a live feed. And the editor? A subconscious part of your brain that you don't control. This is why some truths feel invisible, not because they aren't there, but because your brain deemed them inconvenient. It's not trying to deceive, it's trying to protect. But in doing so, it limits what you see, what you feel, and what you believe is possible. You think you live in the world, but you live in the version your brain made for you. People can develop a foreign accent overnight due to neurological events. The mind, in its fragile complexity, can rewire itself in the most bizarre and haunting ways. One morning, a person might wake up from a stroke, a seizure, or a head injury, and suddenly, their voice no longer sounds like their own. They haven't traveled, they haven't learned a new language, but their speech patterns, rhythms, and tones now echo an entirely foreign accent. This phenomenon, known as foreign accent syndrome, is one of the most unsettling reminders that identity is not fixed. It's held together by the trembling threads of brain function. Imagine speaking with your native tongue your entire life, perhaps British English, soft and familiar, and waking up to hear yourself with a thick Eastern European lilt. Friends look at you strangely. Family asks if you're joking, but you're not. You're trapped inside a voice that doesn't match your memories. Your accent says foreign, even though you've never left your hometown. This condition doesn't mean the person is faking it or pretending. Neurologists have discovered that damage to specific parts of the brain involved in speech production, particularly the motor cortex, cerebellum, or Broca's area, can disrupt the delicate muscle coordination that gives speech its native flavor. The person still speaks the same language, but the melody of their voice changes. Words become sharper, syllables stretched or clipped, intonations rise and fall in unfamiliar ways. But the strangest part isn't just the sound, it's what happens emotionally. Many patients report feeling like strangers to themselves. Their identity, the way they relate to their world, feels altered. They grieve the loss of their old voice. Some avoid talking altogether, haunted by the echoes of a sound that feels borrowed. Social consequences can be brutal. People assume it's a joke. Some accuse them of faking. Others laugh or distance themselves. And yet, inside, the person is the same. The mind has not changed their personality or thoughts, only the shape of their sound. This neurological quirk reveals a disturbing truth. Even the voice, the thing most associated with oneself, can be rewired by a glitch in gray matter. The self is not a fortress. It's a flickering projection held together by vulnerable circuits. And when those circuits shift, even the way we say hello can betray us. The mind cannot tell the difference between a deeply imagined event and a real one. There are moments you remember so vividly, the feel of the air, the rush in your chest, the look in someone's eyes, that your body still reacts when you think about them. But what if some of those moments never actually happened? What if they were imagined, and your mind couldn't tell the difference? This isn't fantasy, it's how the brain works. When an event is deeply imagined, visualized with detail, emotion, and repetition, the same neural circuits fire as they would if the event were real. The same areas light up, the same stress hormones release, the same muscle memory forms. To the brain, experience is experience, whether it comes from the outside world or the inner theater of thought. Athletes use this to win. They rehearse victory in their minds so vividly that their bodies adapt before the race even begins. Soldiers are trained to mentally walk through danger again and again, building resilience. Patients with paralysis have used mental practice to regain movement. The mind responds to the image, not the source. But this truth has a shadow, because the same thing happens with trauma. If someone replays a painful moment over and over, mentally rehearsing the heartbreak, the humiliation, the accident, the brain relives it. Cortisol floods the body again. The stomach knots. The heart races. No new harm is done, but the mind believes it's happening all over again. Emotional scars reopen, not from new pain, but from powerful recall. This is why imagined fears can break a person down as effectively as real threats. Why dread of something that might happen can physically exhaust the body. The nervous system can't always distinguish a mental simulation from reality, and that blurring of lines can either become a tool for healing or a trap that loops suffering endlessly. Even in dreams, the body responds to imagined events as though they're happening. Eyes twitch, muscles jerk, hearts pound. You wake up breathless, your body drenched in fear or bliss from something that never physically occurred. The mind lived it, and so the body did too. This is both terrifying and liberating because it means pain can be replayed, but so can joy. Healing can begin in the mind, and transformation doesn't always need to wait for external change. The stories told internally matter as much, sometimes more. than the life happening outside. You never truly see the world. You see your brain's best guess. What the eyes capture is not reality. It is raw, chaotic light, waves and photons bouncing off surfaces, flooding the retina with data that is meaningless on its own. The shocking truth is that the mind never sees the world directly. Instead, it filters, edits, and guesses, constructing a version of reality that feels complete but is, in fact, a mental hallucination that just happens to agree with others most of the time. Every time the eyes open, the brain fills in the blanks. There are blind spots in vision where the optic nerve meets the retina, yet no one sees holes in their sight. The brain patches over them with context, assumptions, and memory. Colors are interpreted, not inherent. Motion is stitched together in fractions of seconds, like a flipbook. Even the edges of the visual field aren't fully processed. The brain just assumes continuity and builds the illusion of a seamless world. But this guessing game doesn't stop with vision. It stretches into meaning, shape, and identity. That's why illusions work, why faces appear in clouds, why a stick in water looks broken. The mind wants patterns. It wants coherence more than it wants truth. This is how two people can witness the same event and recall different realities. Their brains weren't just recording, they were interpreting, predicting, prioritizing. One saw a threat, the other saw confusion, and both walked away certain of what they saw. Even stranger, the brain starts predicting what it thinks should happen next before it even finishes processing what is currently happening. This predictive processing shapes perception in real time. You don't just see the world, you anticipate it. That's why sudden change feels shocking. The brain has to rewrite the model it thought was accurate. When the environment doesn't match the brain's expectations, anxiety spikes. The illusion falters. This is why unfamiliar places feel disorienting and why people feel seen when someone understands them deeply. It's not just emotional, it's neurological. It's the brain's model of the world being validated. So the frightening truth is this: what's seen is not the truth. It's the brain's best guess based on incomplete, distorted input, a story stitched together from memory, expectation, and assumption. Reality is not what the eyes reveal, it's what the brain agrees to believe. Emotions can be contagious through facial micro-expressions alone. You might think emotions are private, that what happens inside stays inside, but the truth is far stranger. Emotions leak, and they spread. Without a word spoken, without a single conscious cue, someone else's feelings can enter your body through a twitch of a muscle, a flicker in an eye, a half-second lift of the mouth. These are called micro-expressions, tiny flashes of emotion that pass across the face in as little as 1/25th of a second, and your brain catches them even if you don't. When someone fakes a smile, but deep down they're angry or sad, their real emotion often breaks through, just for an instant. A flash of contempt in the corner of their mouth, a flicker of fear in their brow. Your subconscious sees it, and without your permission, your body starts to mirror it. Your heart rate might rise, your mood might shift, your thoughts might darken. You're catching their emotion like a virus. This is emotional contagion, and it spreads fast. This isn't empathy, it's reflex. Mirror neurons in the brain respond to other people's facial movements and emotions by preparing your body to feel the same thing. It's how babies learn to smile. It's why one person laughing uncontrollably can make an entire room dissolve into giggles, but it's also why sitting near someone anxious can make your chest feel tight, why watching someone cry can bring tears to your eyes, even if you don't know why they're crying. The mind is wired to synchronize with others because long ago, survival depended on it. If one person sensed danger, the group had to follow. Instantly, the face became a warning system, and that system never shut off. Even now, your brain scans every face you pass, looking for signs of fear, anger, joy, threat. Every flicker shapes your reality. What's most haunting is how unconscious this process is. You may leave a conversation feeling drained, restless, sad, without realizing the other person never said a single negative word. Their micro expressions spoke louder, and your nervous system listened. This is why emotional environments matter more than people think. The energy in a room, the expressions people try to hide, the masks they wear too tightly. You feel it all, whether you want to or not, because the mind listens not just to words, but to faces, and faces never lie for long. The brain turns off visual input during eye movements, creating tiny moments of blindness. Every time the eyes dart from one point to another, the brain goes temporarily blind, not because the eyes stop working, but because the mind chooses to shut down visual input in those brief flickers of movement called saccades. It's a protective act, a deliberate blackout that prevents the chaos of blurred, disorienting images from overwhelming perception. What's even stranger is this: you never notice it. You've spent your entire life blind for several hours cumulatively, and your mind has erased every gap so flawlessly that you believe the world was continuous. This strange act is called saccadic masking, and it happens several times every second. Your eyes move constantly, glancing at faces, reading words, scanning rooms, but during each flick, which lasts mere milliseconds, the brain suppresses the visual signal, not just passively, but actively, as if it flips a switch that says, ignore this. Why? Because the image captured during a saccade would be a smear of motion, a blur of disorientation. Instead of subjecting you to that chaos, the brain does something radical. It deletes it, and then it fills in the missing moment with what it thinks should be there, based on memory, context, and expectation. This isn't a glitch, it's a feature. It keeps perception smooth. It protects the illusion that vision is seamless and constant, but it also reveals something deeply unsettling about reality. The brain edits the world before you're allowed to see it. You're not perceiving everything. You're being shown a highlight reel, a curated stream of certainty, and in those invisible flickers of blindness, the mind decides what stays and what disappears. This means that in a fast moment, like a car speeding by or a subtle facial expression, something critical can happen and vanish between saccades, gone before your awareness ever catches it. And still, you'd swear you saw everything. That's how convincing the illusion is. The world doesn't pause for your eyes, but your brain pauses the world for itself. In the milliseconds of blindness between every glance, reality dissolves, and your mind quietly paints it back in. You can fall in love with someone entirely through imagined interactions. It's possible to fall for someone without ever touching them, without ever hearing their voice, without them even knowing. And what's more unsettling, it can feel just as real, just as intense as any love shaped in the real world. The brain does not require physical presence to attach. It only needs a story, a belief, a feeling rehearsed often enough that it becomes truth. This is how parasocial relationships form, those deep emotional connections to celebrities, fictional characters, even strangers followed on social media. The person being loved may never interact. They may never exist beyond a screen, but inside the mind, calmly conversations happen, moments are imagined, a bond is built, and the chemicals in the brain respond as if the love is mutual. Oxytocin, dopamine, serotonin, they flood the system not just when someone is touched or kissed, but when someone is thought of, dreamed of, longed for. The mind builds a version of them, a perfect version, one that listens, that understands, that doesn't hurt or reject. The heart begins to respond to this fantasy as if it were flesh. People fall in love with a memory, with a smile they once saw, with the idea of who someone could be. They replay imaginary dialogues, they walk through made-up futures, they feel jealousy over someone who's never loved them. It's a strange torment, beautiful and aching, a love with no grounding but all the intensity. Sometimes this happens after brief, real encounters, a conversation at a party, a glance across a room. The mind takes that seed and builds an entire relationship inside. The person becomes more than they are, becomes a projection of desire, of need, of longing, and the feelings follow, deepening with every imagined interaction. This phenomenon isn't weakness, it's human. The brain is built for storytelling, and love is its favorite story. It doesn't care if the details are real. If the emotional structure is convincing, the brain accepts it. The heart doesn't check credentials, it just beats. But this kind of love can be both a refuge and a trap, because what's imagined can't disappoint, but it also can't touch you back. It can feel safe, it can feel all-consuming, and yet it lives entirely in the space between thought and longing, where nothing is quite real, but everything feels true. The mind will often prefer a familiar pain to an unfamiliar peace. There is a cruel comfort in what hurts but feels known. The mind, built for survival, not serenity, clings to what it understands, even when what it understands is pain. A toxic relationship, a self-sabotaging thought pattern, the quiet ache of inadequacy, these can become familiar shadows, and the brain, desperate for certainty, learns to prefer their presence over the terrifying vastness of peace that feels unfamiliar and unearned. This isn't weakness, it's wiring. The mind stores pain not just as memory, but as a template for expectation. If someone has grown up in chaos, silence feels suspicious. If love has always meant disappointment, kindness feels like a trick. If self-worth has always come with conditions, peace without effort feels wrong. And so even when relief is within reach, the brain can recoil. It says, "This isn't how the story goes." Neuroscience shows that familiar experiences light up pathways in the brain more efficiently than new ones, even if those familiar experiences are harmful. It's not about what's good, it's about what's predictable. And predictability means safety to a brain trained by trauma, repetition, or emotional hunger. This is why people return to the same arguments, seek out the same rejection, replay the same mental loops. Peace demands surrender, and surrender feels like death to a mind shaped by vigilance. So it turns back toward the pain it recognizes, because at least it knows the rules there. This is why healing often feels worse before it feels better. The absence of chaos can trigger anxiety. The brain scans for the disaster it believes must be coming. That's why people feel unsettled in healthy relationships, or restless in calm environments, or empty after letting go of a grudge. The peace is real, but it's foreign, and the mind mistakes foreign for dangerous. So the cruel irony is this: people stay in pain not because they love it, but because it feels like home. And peace, raw, unstructured, unconditional peace, feels like an alien land where they do not yet know how to breathe. The mind begs for relief, but when it arrives, it doesn't always know how to stay. You forget most dreams not because they're unimportant, but because the brain actively suppresses them. Every night, entire worlds are built in silence. You walk through them, feel through them, sometimes cry or fall in love, or face your worst fears, and then, by morning, they're gone, not faded, erased, as if your mind, the very one that created them, decided they were never meant to be remembered. This isn't forgetfulness, it's suppression. The brain doesn't lose dreams by accident, it throws them away on purpose. During REM sleep, when most vivid dreaming occurs, the brain is alive with activity, often more intense than during waking life. Emotions surge, images collide, memories reorganize themselves into strange new combinations. But while all of this is happening, the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for logic, decision-making, and most importantly, memory consolidation, goes quiet. It's like the recording equipment is turned off just as the show begins. This intentional muting isn't a glitch, it's a function. Some scientists believe the brain does this to protect the conscious mind. Dreams are chaotic, emotional, symbolic. If you remembered them all, your sense of reality might start to bend. You'd begin to confuse waking life with the surreal narratives of the night. By suppressing them, the brain draws a boundary. Here is the real world, and here is the dream. But not all dreams disappear. The ones that break through, those that shake you awake in sweat or linger like perfume hours after you rise, those are the ones that resist suppression. Their emotional intensity spikes adrenaline, leaving imprints deep enough to cross the barrier. You don't remember them because they were more important. You remember them because they were more loud. Some believe the dreams that vanish carry messages, unresolved feelings, creative fragments that never got the chance to bloom. They slip beneath awareness but still influence you, shaping moods, triggering anxieties, coloring your day in ways you can't trace. What you can't recall still moves you. This is why people who train to remember their dreams, lucid dreamers, shamans, artists, often report strange awakenings. The boundary begins to blur, the curtain lifts a little, and the question begins to haunt. If the mind hides so much each night, what else might it be choosing not to show you? False memories can be implanted with nothing more than suggestion. The mind wants to believe it knows what happened, but memory is not a recording. It's a reconstruction, vulnerable to influence, shaped by stories, and frighteningly easy to bend. A simple suggestion, a gentle question, or a confidently told lie can slip into the cracks of someone's recollection and bloom into a memory that feels as real as the truth. This isn't a trick for the gullible. It happens to the intelligent, the cautious, the skeptical, because memory doesn't guard against persuasion, it invites it in. In experiments, researchers have convinced people they were lost in a mall as a child, pet a mouse that didn't exist, or met a celebrity they've never seen. They planted these memories with nothing more than suggestive language, fabricated photographs, or repeated questioning, and the subjects didn't just believe, they began filling in details. They described what the mall looked like, how they felt, what happened next. The lie became a lived experience. The brain doesn't store memory like a hard drive. Each time something is remembered, it is rebuilt, and that reconstruction can absorb suggestion like water into a sponge. The more vivid the story, the more likely the mind will adopt it as its own. It doesn't just record, it confabulates, blending imagination with reality until even the person remembering can't tell the difference. This is why therapists must be careful when asking about childhood trauma, why eyewitness testimony can convict the innocent, why families can fracture over memories no one else can confirm. When someone is told, "Don't you remember when?" the brain searches for that file, and if it doesn't exist, it sometimes creates one, not maliciously, but loyally. The mind wants to please, it wants to make sense, and it would rather invent a past than admit to a blank. False memories don't feel false. They carry emotional weight, physical reactions, even guilt or joy. They can shape identities, create phobias, break hearts, all from a seed of suggestion planted in soft soil. This terrifying truth dismantles the belief that memory equals truth. What is remembered may never have happened. What is forgotten may have been everything, and all it takes to reshape a life story is a well-placed sentence. Your thoughts change the shape of your brain in real time. Every thought is an architect, every belief a sculptor. Right now, this very second, your brain is physically changing because of what you're thinking, not metaphorically, not emotionally, structurally. The idea that the brain is fixed, set like wet cement after childhood, is a myth long dead. The truth is stranger and more powerful. Your thoughts bend biology. They rewire circuits. They thicken pathways. They carve trails through gray matter with each repetition. The mind is not housed in the brain. The mind builds it. This phenomenon is called neuroplasticity, and it means your inner world is constantly reshaping your outer one. When you think something once, your neurons send a weak pulse across a new connection. When you think it again, the pulse gets stronger. When you obsess, the wire thickens. And eventually, the thought doesn't need effort. It becomes automatic, a reflex, a default setting in your mental operating system. This is how anxiety embeds itself. One small fear rehearsed over time grows a root system. One criticism replayed becomes a belief. The brain is listening to your thoughts like instructions, and it does what it's told. Repeated thoughts are treated as truths, and those truths get wired into the physical structure of who you are. But the beauty, terrifying and freeing, is that this process works both ways. Healing thoughts rewire just as deeply. Gratitude physically grows new connections in the brain's reward center. Compassion thickens the pathways responsible for emotional regulation. Mindfulness builds gray matter in the hippocampus, the region tied to memory and self-awareness. You can literally sculpt a calmer, wiser, stronger brain just by thinking differently, over and over, on purpose. This is why affirmations work, why trauma therapy changes lives, why people can shift from pessimism to resilience, not because of magic, but because neurons are always listening. The mind isn't just reacting to the world, it's creating the brain that experiences it. So when you think, know this, it's not just noise in your head, it's architecture. You are laying bricks, carving tunnels, planting forests, or digging holes. You're shaping the very thing that shapes your reality. And the more you repeat a thought, the more it becomes who you are, not just mentally, but physically, cell by cell. People can hallucinate voices of loved ones after loss, and the mind treats it as comfort. Grief does not follow logic. It rewires the mind, scrambles the senses, and leaves behind echoes in the quietest places. After the loss of someone deeply loved, the brain can conjure their voice, not as metaphor, but as sound, a whisper in the hallway, a soft hello in the other room, a phrase spoken so clearly that the heart surges before the mind remembers. They're gone. But instead of rejecting the hallucination, the mind embraces it, because in the aching void of absence, comfort can take the form of illusion. This phenomenon is not rare. Widows report hearing their spouse's voice at night. Parents of lost children swear they hear footsteps or laughter in the distance. Some people even carry conversations with those who've passed, not in imagination, but in what feels like real auditory experience. These are not delusions of madness. They are grief's way of surviving the unbearable. Neurologically, the brain is primed to expect familiar sounds. The auditory cortex, trained by years of repetition, remains alert for patterns, especially those tied to emotion. After loss, the expectation doesn't vanish. The mind continues listening, and sometimes it fills the silence with what it misses most. These experiences don't always feel like hallucinations. They feel like visitations, like a brief return, and rather than cause distress, they often bring a strange peace. The voice may say something mundane or something the griever needed to hear, but whether it's a product of longing or something more mysterious, the mind treats it not as fear, but as solace. Psychologists call this bereavement hallucination, but that word feels too clinical for what's really happening. The psyche, shattered by loss, reaches backward, pulling sounds from memory, dreams, or imagination to ease the ache. It's not just hearing a voice, it's feeling less alone. Some hide these experiences, fearing they're broken, but they are not. They are human. The brain is trying to heal in the only way it knows, by bringing the lost one close again, even for a moment, even in illusion. And when that phantom voice fades, what lingers is not fear, but the warmth of something familiar, something loved, gently saying, I'm still with you. The brain rewards certainty, even when the certainty is wrong. The brain craves certainty like the body craves oxygen. It clings to it, protects it, and rewards it with a quiet sense of safety, whether the certainty is true or not. In fact, truth is often irrelevant. If an idea feels certain, the brain floods itself with dopamine. There's a chemical satisfaction in knowing or thinking you do. It's not accuracy that brings peace, it's confidence. This is why people hold on to beliefs that are proven false, why conspiracies take root, why someone can be shown undeniable evidence and still say, I just know I'm right. The feeling of certainty becomes more important than the content of the belief. To the brain, doubt is danger. Certainty is survival. This wiring comes from evolution. In a world of predators and peril, hesitation could cost a life. The brain learned to make fast decisions and stick to them. Better to be confidently wrong than paralyzed by uncertainty. Over time, the reward system began to reinforce confidence itself, creating a loop where conviction feels good and confusion feels like a threat. This is why being wrong feels physically uncomfortable. It activates the anterior cingulate cortex, the brain's error detector, triggering a stress response. It's the same region involved in pain, but when someone believes they're right, even if they're not, dopamine is released. The stress fades, the mind relaxes. It doesn't matter if the belief is false. What matters is that it feels true. Even worse, the more often a belief is repeated, the more familiar it becomes. And the brain loves familiarity. It equates it with truth. This is called the illusion of truth effect. Say something enough times, even a lie, and it starts to feel certain. The brain rewards the echo, not the origin. This is why people argue facts with emotions, why logic can't always pierce delusion, why admitting I don't know is one of the most courageous things a person can do, because the brain punishes uncertainty. It makes doubt feel like failure, but sometimes uncertainty is the first sign that something real is beginning to unfold, because in the shadows of doubt, truth waits, quiet, uncomfortable, but honest, and far more fragile than the rush of being sure. You're more likely to believe something just because it rhymes. The brain is wired for rhythm, for symmetry, for patterns that feel like music. When something rhymes, it doesn't just sound pleasing, it feels true. This quirk, known as the rhyme as reason effect, is one of the mind's strangest cognitive shortcuts. A rhyming phrase is processed more fluently, more easily, and that smooth mental glide is mistaken for accuracy. The result? People believe a lie more readily when it dances. Sayings like, an apple a day keeps the doctor away, or, if the glove doesn't fit, you must acquit, bypass rational scrutiny. They don't just stick, they persuade. Their rhyme gives them a rhythm of authority, as if truth should come wrapped in verse. But the content can be empty or misleading. It doesn't matter. If it rhymes, the brain lowers its guard. This effect is so powerful that it has shaped political slogans, courtroom defenses, advertisements, and folklore. Rhyming phrases are remembered longer, repeated more, and trusted deeper, not because they're factually sound, but because they feel good in the mouth and the mind. In experiments, participants were given pairs of statements. One rhymed and one didn't, like woes unite foes versus woes unite enemies. The rhyming version was consistently rated as more accurate. Nothing had changed except the musicality. But to the brain, rhyme meant right. This is cognitive fluency at work. The easier it is to process something, the more likely the brain is to trust it. Rhymes slide into consciousness without friction. They require less effort to decode, and the brain confuses that ease with truth. It says, this makes sense, even when it doesn't. This makes the rhyme as reason effect a potent tool for manipulation. Politicians, marketers, even con artists exploit it. They package ideas in rhyme not for clarity, but for credibility. And it works on everyone. Intelligence doesn't immunize against it. Rationality folds under rhythm. This eerie trick of the mind reveals how fragile belief can be, not always grounded in logic, evidence, or thought, but sometimes in how nicely the sentence ends. Truth can be ignored, but a rhyme seduces, and the brain, ever trusting of the smooth and the simple, nods along in agreement, even when it should be questioning. Thinking in a foreign language makes your decisions more rational. When the mind switches tongues, something strange happens. It becomes colder, clearer, and less impulsive. Thinking in a foreign language creates a kind of emotional distance, a quiet detachment that changes how choices are made. Morality shifts, risk is reassessed, gut reactions weaken, and what's left behind is a mind that reasons more like a scientist than a panicked animal. This is called the foreign language effect, and it's not just theory. Studies have shown that when people face ethical dilemmas, like whether to sacrifice one person to save five, their answers change depending on the language they think in. In their native tongue, emotion drives the decision. Hesitation, guilt, empathy all swell up. But in a foreign language, they're more likely to choose the cold, logical path. Less mercy, more math. It isn't that people become heartless. It's that language carries emotion, and the mother tongue is soaked in it. Every word echoes with childhood, culture, history, love, death, failure. They hit differently in the language you were raised on. In a second language, the emotional charge is muted. You still understand, but you don't feel as deeply. That space between word and meaning becomes a buffer, and in that space, rationality blooms. This is why bilingual people often say they feel like a different person in another language. They're not imagining it. Their emotional wiring changes, their tone shifts, their sense of self bends. In some languages, they're more confident, in others, more reserved. But when making decisions, especially high stakes or moral ones, they become more deliberate, more detached from bias. Even something as small as financial risk-taking is affected. People tend to be more cautious in their native language and more willing to gamble in a foreign one. It's not recklessness, it's analysis. The brain stops reacting from the gut and starts reasoning from a distance. This doesn't mean one way is better. Sometimes emotion should guide the choice. Sometimes morality needs to feel messy. But this effect reveals just how much language isn't just communication, it's cognition. The words thought in are not neutral vessels. They shape logic. They bend decisions. They can either fan the fire or cool the mind. So the next time a decision feels overwhelming, try thinking it through in another language. You might find clarity where emotion once clouded, not because the answer changed, because you did. You can become allergic to something purely through belief. The body listens to the mind more than it listens to reality. That's why it's possible, terrifyingly possible, to develop physical symptoms like rashes, hives, swelling, or even full-blown allergic reactions to something that poses no biological threat at all. Not because the body is broken, but because belief is that powerful. If the brain believes something is harmful, the body can act as though it is, even if the substance is completely harmless. This phenomenon, sometimes called a psychogenic allergy or nocebo-induced reaction, is the shadow twin of the placebo effect. But instead of healing through hope, the body breaks down through fear. A person can touch a flower they believe they're allergic to and immediately begin sneezing. They might eat a food labeled incorrectly as dangerous and start experiencing tightness in the chest or throat. Their immune system, hijacked by expectation, goes into battle mode, fighting a phantom threat. In one study, a group of people with known allergies was given fake stimuli, placebos disguised as allergens. They reacted. Some had hives, others developed respiratory symptoms, but chemically, nothing harmful had touched them. It was the expectation of harm that triggered the immune response. The body was responding not to a substance, but to an idea. Even more disturbing are cases where individuals develop full allergic reactions to something they've never had an issue with, simply because they've been told they should react. A parent warning a child repeatedly that peanuts are deadly can lead to a child developing allergic responses long before any real exposure. The fear becomes embodied. The brain turns belief into biology. This mind-body betrayal doesn't stop at food or pollen. People have reported allergic-like symptoms triggered by smells, colors, and even thoughts. Someone may break out in a rash when entering a room where a certain person is present because their mind associates that person with stress or danger. The immune system becomes an accomplice to the mind's projections. It forces a haunting question: how much of what we feel physically is a reaction to the world, and how much is a reflection of our beliefs about it? The answer is unsettling, because if belief alone can trigger the body to attack itself, then reality is no longer the authority. The mind is. The voice in your head has no sound, but still shapes your identity. No one else hears it. It doesn't vibrate in the air. It doesn't echo in your ears. And yet, the voice in your head is one of the loudest forces in your life. It has no sound, but it carries weight. It narrates your days, judges your actions, replays conversations, rehearses futures. It scolds, it comforts, it questions, it believes, and slowly it becomes you. This voice is not random. It was built over time, stitched together from parents, teachers, media, memories, wounds. The way it talks to you often mirrors how others once talked about you. If it's harsh, it likely began with someone else's criticism. If it's fearful, it probably grew from a time you didn't feel safe. But even when the original source is gone, the voice remains, and the mind listens. You don't choose this voice, not at first. It just speaks. It tells you who you are, what you can and can't do, what people think of you. It defines limits. It spins stories, and the more you repeat those stories, the more real they become. You're lazy. You're broken. You'll fail. You're too much. You're not enough. It doesn't have to shout. Whispered lies told daily become your truth. But here's what's terrifying and liberating. The voice isn't fixed. It's not you. It's a habit of thought, a learned tone, a loop. And if it was programmed, it can be reprogrammed. You can rewrite the inner script. You can teach the voice new language, one of kindness, of curiosity, of possibility. It takes time, repetition, conscious effort, but the brain listens, the mind shifts. People spend years chasing external validation while their internal narrator tears them apart. They seek love but reject themselves silently. They appear confident but shrink when alone, listening to that ancient voice whispering unworthiness. What they don't realize is that changing this voice, this soundless shadow, might change everything, because identity is not just shaped by what happens to you. It's shaped by what you tell yourself afterward. So ask, who taught your inner voice how to speak? And are they still in charge? Because until that voice becomes a friend, even the best life will feel like a lie. The echo inside your skull might be invisible, but it's the author of your story. You are less logical when you're hungry, and you don't notice hunger doesn't just rumble in the stomach, it hijacks the mind. When the body is low on glucose, the brain's fuel source, rational thinking, begins to erode. But the terrifying part isn't the decline in logic, it's the invisibility of it. You don't feel less logical. You feel justified. Your emotions swell, your judgments sharpen, your patience thins, but it all feels normal. It feels right. And that's the trap. Studies show that decision-making becomes impulsive when blood sugar drops. People take bigger risks, misjudge consequences, and respond with more aggression during debates or arguments. A courtroom study even revealed that judges were significantly harsher right before lunch, handing out longer sentences, showing less leniency, only to soften again after they ate. Justice itself bent to the influence of hunger. But this isn't just about food, it's about self-control. Hunger weakens the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for planning, reasoning, and restraint. Without enough energy, it can't properly regulate the amygdala, the center for emotion and threat response. The result? The emotional brain takes the wheel while the rational brain fades into the back seat. You may lash out during a conversation. You might make impulsive purchases, abandon goals, or spiral into overthinking, all while being unaware that hunger is driving the chaos. Because hunger doesn't announce itself with a flashing light that says your logic is offline. It whispers, they're annoying. You're right, act now. This is why small disagreements escalate, why someone feels harder to love when the fridge is empty, why decisions made on an empty stomach often lead to regret. Hunger makes the world feel more urgent, people more irritating, and problems more unsolvable. And yet the ego insists, I'm thinking clearly. That's the scariest part. The decline in logic doesn't come with self-awareness. It comes with confidence. You feel certain, decisive, justified, at the very moment your judgment is most compromised. In those moments, the brain doesn't cry out for help. It doubles down. And unless you pause, unless you recognize the subtle erosion, you might act in ways that feel entirely rational, only to realize later it was just hunger speaking in your voice. You can experience nostalgia for things that never happened. There's a feeling that sometimes drifts in like fog, a soft ache, a longing for a moment that never was, a memory that feels warm, familiar, even sacred, yet you can't place it. You can almost see the scene, the sunlight through a window, a voice in the next room, laughter echoing down a hallway you've never walked. It's nostalgia, but for something that never happened. This is not imagination. It's a glitch of the heart, a trick of the mind that blends emotion and fantasy into something that feels like memory, and the body responds as if it's true. Your chest tightens, your eyes sting, you ache for a time or place that doesn't exist outside your own internal world. But in that moment, it's real enough to grieve. This strange phenomenon happens because nostalgia doesn't rely on facts. It runs on emotion. It doesn't need an actual memory. It just needs the emotional shape of one, the warmth of belonging, the sweetness of a moment unspoiled, the illusion of innocence or peace, and the mind, ever hungry to make sense of longing, fills in the gaps with fragments of stories, movies, books, songs, dreams, until it builds a past you never lived. Sometimes it's triggered by music. A melody plays, and suddenly you miss a summer that never belonged to you, or a smell, cut grass, an old book, and your heart clenches as if you've returned to someplace sacred, but there's no photograph to prove it, no name to give it, just a ghost feeling, haunting you with beauty that never had a chance to fade. Even memories of fictional worlds can feel more nostalgic than your own life. People cry over childhoods spent in movies, over characters they never met, over stories they believed in so deeply that they became part of their emotional history. The brain stores these emotional connections as if they were lived, and the soul doesn't argue. This kind of nostalgia is bittersweet because it's built on a hunger that can never be satisfied. You can't return to something that never was, and yet the feeling still moves you. It shapes you. It becomes part of your identity, not because it's true in time, but because it's true in tone. And maybe that's enough. Maybe the ache itself is the point, a reminder that even what never happened can still be deeply, undeniably felt. The brain fills in blind spots with hallucinated imagery. Every human eye has a blind spot, a place where the optic nerve exits the retina and no photoreceptors exist. In that spot, you are literally blind. There is no visual information entering the brain, and yet you never see a hole. There's no black dot in your vision, no flickering void, because the brain refuses to accept gaps in perception. So it lies, it hallucinates, it fills in the blind spot with what it thinks should be there, stitching together an illusion of completeness with artificial imagery you didn't consent to seeing. This isn't metaphorical. This is neurological fact. The brain scans the surrounding environment, colors, shapes, textures. and invents content to patch the empty space. That patch isn't based on what's really there. It's based on the brain's best guess, and you believe it effortlessly. You don't question it. You can't even detect it because the hallucination doesn't feel false. It feels like truth. This internal illusion happens every moment of your waking life. Right now, part of your vision is fabricated, and you have no way of knowing which part. That object you think you're seeing, it could be partially imagined. The texture on the wall, filled in. The edge of your phone, inferred. You're walking through a world that is only partially observed and largely constructed. This reveals something deeply unsettling. The brain values coherence more than accuracy. It would rather invent a plausible version of the world than admit ignorance. Blindness is unacceptable. Confusion is unacceptable. So the mind chooses illusion. And this patchwork doesn't just happen in the eye. It happens across perception, in memory, emotion, identity. The mind fills in blanks with assumptions, expectations, and stories. Not because it's malicious, but because it's trying to protect you from the terror of not knowing. But when the brain hallucinates the world to make it feel whole, it creates a terrifying possibility. How much of what you see, what you trust, what you build your life around, is simply the brain making things up, not as deception, but as a coping mechanism. The truth is this: part of your vision is always a lie, and the part that lies is the part you'll never detect. When people speak to themselves in third person, they experience less emotional pain. There's something oddly powerful about calling yourself by name when you're hurting. It feels strange at first, unnatural, distant, even a bit performative, but then something shifts. The panic softens, the shame loosens its grip, and the pain, once tangled so tightly around your identity, begins to unwind. It's not magic, it's neuroscience. When people speak to themselves in the third person, "You'll be okay, Sarah," instead of "I'll be okay," they create a psychological distance that dulls the sting of emotion, and the brain responds. This shift, called distance self-talk, activates parts of the brain tied to emotional regulation. It's the same mechanism that allows someone to give wise advice to a friend, even when they can't follow it themselves. When pain is happening to you, it feels overwhelming. But when pain is happening to her, him, or you, that third-person version, it becomes something to observe, manage, and soothe, not something to drown in. Children do this naturally. When they talk to themselves during stress, "It's okay, Johnny, you can do it," they're instinctively creating space between the emotion and the self. Adults lose that habit. They collapse into the I, and the emotion becomes fused with identity. I am a failure. I am broken. But if the same thought is reframed, "He feels like a failure right now, but he's trying," suddenly, it's survivable. This technique doesn't avoid the emotion. It reframes the relationship with it, and that tiny shift can reduce anxiety, lower cortisol, and slow down the racing heart. The brain reads it as compassion, even if it's self-directed, especially if it's self-directed. People who use third-person self-talk during high-stress moments like public speaking, heartbreak, or loss often report feeling more grounded and less reactive. It's like becoming both the wounded and the healer, the sufferer and the comforter. You remain in the storm, but you're also the one holding the umbrella. And perhaps the most beautiful part, it feels like someone else is there, someone wise, calm, gentle, but they're not. That voice is you, just not the version tangled in panic. It's the version that sees you clearly, the one who knows this pain won't last. You're going to make it through. And sometimes, hearing that in the third person is exactly what the first person needs. The body can respond to imagined stress as if it's real danger. The mind doesn't always wait for reality. Sometimes it reacts to a thought, a single, invisible sentence echoing inside the skull, as if it were a tiger lunging from the shadows. A memory, a worry, a mental rehearsal of something that hasn't happened can flood the body with the same biochemical chaos as actual physical danger. Heart races, muscles tense, stomach tightens, breath shortens, and all of it unfolds while sitting quietly, doing nothing, in a room with no threat at all. This is not overreaction, it's biology. The brain evolved to protect you, not to question what's real. So, when you imagine getting fired, abandoned, embarrassed, or attacked, the mind doesn't say, relax, it's just a thought. It says, prepare for impact. Cortisol surges, adrenaline pumps, the fight or flight system ignites, blood leaves the digestive system and rushes to the limbs, vision sharpens, immune response weakens, the body becomes a battlefield for a war that exists only in the mind. What's worse is how convincing it feels. You start sweating from a thought, you feel nauseous because of a future that hasn't arrived, and the body doesn't differentiate. To it, a vividly imagined threat is a threat. It responds with full force. This is why stress makes people sick. Chronic worry turns into high blood pressure, insomnia, inflammation, and even autoimmune breakdowns. The body isn't malfunctioning, it's obeying, responding faithfully to a mind that won't stop rehearsing danger, and it becomes a loop. The more the body reacts, the more the mind believes the danger must be real. You feel your racing heart and think, something's wrong. You feel dizzy and assume the worst. But it all started with a single thought, one flicker of fear that cascaded into physical crisis. This is how the body keeps score, not only of real experiences, but of imagined ones. And it doesn't need proof to begin suffering. It just needs repetition. Each time the same fear is revisited, the body relives the trauma, not metaphorically, physiologically. The terrifying truth is this: what happens in the mind doesn't stay in the mind. It becomes heartbeat, breath, hormone, and pain. The body becomes the canvas for thoughts that were never even real, and still, it prepares for a danger that may never come. You can dream an entire lifetime in the span of a few minutes. Time bends in dreams. It folds, expands, and collapses like paper in a child's hand. And within that fold, a person can live an entire life, fall in love, grow old, grieve, heal, die, and then wake up in the same bed they fell asleep in, with the clock barely moved. Minutes have passed, but inside the dream, decades unfurled. 1,000 moments rushed in and out like waves in silence. This isn't an exaggeration. It's a well-documented phenomenon. The brain, freed from the anchor of real-world time, constructs narratives at lightning speed during REM sleep. The stories feel complete, coherent, often emotionally overwhelming. And when the dreamer awakens, the mind struggles to reconcile the depth of experience with the reality of a ticking clock. It feels unfair, disorienting, sometimes sacred. People report dreaming of growing up in a town that never existed, loving people whose faces are now permanently etched in their hearts, or losing children they never had. Some wake up sobbing over a fictional life more vivid than their waking one. They feel homesick for a place that never was, lonely for someone who only existed in their dream, because the feeling was real, even if the timeline was an illusion. This time compression happens because the dreaming mind doesn't rely on physical stimuli. It builds with meaning, not minutes. In the waking world, time drips slowly, filtered through senses, calendars, clocks. But in dreams, entire arcs, birth to death, war to peace, betrayal to forgiveness, can happen in a flash. The mind writes the novel, reads it, and feels it in one unbroken breath. Lucid dreamers sometimes describe experimenting with time, consciously stretching scenes or living multiple lives across one night. Others slip into these experiences passively, waking up haunted by memories they can't place, not because they're unclear, but because they don't belong to this life. This is why dreams feel so sacred, so strange. They let the mind play God with time. They remind the soul that life isn't counted in hours, It's counted in meaning, in emotional density, in the depth of what's felt. And in that sense, a 5-minute dream of a full life can leave a deeper imprint than a year lived without wonder. Somewhere in the folds of your sleep, you may have already lived and died 1,000 times, and you wouldn't even know, except for the feeling you can't quite shake, the ache for something you never truly lost. The placebo effect works even when you know it's a placebo. The brain doesn't need to be fooled to begin healing. It just needs a ritual, a symbol, a story it can believe in. This is the strange, almost magical power of the placebo effect. People can swallow a sugar pill labeled placebo and still experience real, measurable improvements in pain, mood, sleep, and even immune response. They know it's fake. There's no deception, and yet their body responds as if the pill contained medicine, as if the lie had slipped past the mind's defenses. But there is no lie, only belief, and that's enough. In clinical trials, patients told explicitly, this is a placebo. It contains no active ingredients, but placebos have been shown to help, reported significant relief from chronic symptoms, migraines eased, IBS calmed, depression lifted, all from a pill that did absolutely nothing except activate the body's own healing response. This defies logic. We're taught that belief must be blind to have power, but the brain isn't bound to logic, it's bound to meaning. The act of taking a pill, sitting in a doctor's office, following a routine, all of these signal safety, care, and intervention. The body listens not to chemicals, but to context. And when the context says healing is happening, the body plays along. This means that healing is not just pharmacological, it's psychological, ritualistic, symbolic. The placebo becomes a kind of psychological spell, activating the brain's pharmacy. Dopamine increases, endorphins release, the immune system perks up, pain perception drops. The body obeys belief even when the mind whispers, but this is just sugar. What's even more haunting is that this effect can work better when the person is told they're being treated, not just because of the pill, but because someone is caring for them, listening, touching, explaining. The body interprets this attention as medicine in its own right. It reveals something most don't want to accept. Much of what heals us isn't the drug, it's the dance around it, the ritual, the intention, the belief that something is being done. And when that belief is strong enough, even a lie dressed in honesty can heal, not through trickery, but through the mind's ancient power to turn faith into chemistry. Some people are born without an internal monologue and never know it. For most, life is narrated. Every thought has a voice. Every decision, argument, doubt, or dream runs through a silent commentator inside the mind, a voice that whispers during walks, that replays mistakes, that imagines futures in phrases and full sentences. But here's the strange truth. Not everyone has this. Some people are born without an internal monologue, and they never realize it's missing until someone tells them it exists. To them, thoughts aren't heard. They're known. They don't say things to themselves in their heads. There's no inner voice describing, debating, planning. Instead, their thinking unfolds through images, abstract feelings, or quiet intuition. It's as if the script of thought was replaced by raw experience, a visual flash instead of a sentence, a decision made without a line of reasoning spoken inside. And for a long time, no one talked about this difference because no one knew it was a difference. People assumed their own way of thinking was universal. So when someone with no inner voice hears another person describe theirs, the reaction is often disbelief. Wait, you hear words in your head all the time, like an actual voice? That sounds exhausting. And the response in return is just as shocked. You mean you don't? What do you do when you read, or think, or argue with yourself? This silent divide reveals something profound. The mind doesn't think in one language. It has many dialects. Some use words, others use shapes, colors, impulses. Some people narrate every step through their day. Others just move. Some analyze their feelings through internal conversations. Others simply feel, instantly, without translation. There's no better or worse, just different wiring. But the implications are deep. The presence or absence of an inner monologue can affect how a person remembers things, makes decisions, feels empathy, even how they dream. And most fascinating of all, many people go through decades of life assuming their way is the only way until a conversation reveals an entire internal world they never knew existed. So the next time someone says, "I was talking to myself," or "I can't stop arguing with my own brain," know this: for some, that voice is constant company. For others, there's only silence. Not a lack of thought, just thought, without sound. The brain creates your sense of self around age 2 and defends it forever. At around 2 years old, something profound happens inside the human brain, something that will shape every thought, every emotion, every decision for the rest of your life. The mind creates a self. Before this moment, experience is sensation, hunger, sound, light, comfort. There is no me, only experience. But around this age, the brain assembles enough neural architecture to form an identity. It's not just that the child sees the world, it's that the child starts seeing themselves in it. This is when toddlers begin to use words like mine, when they recognize themselves in mirrors, when embarrassment, pride, shame, and independence erupt. The self is born, and the brain clings to it like it's everything, because from that moment on, it is. What begins as a cognitive milestone becomes a fortress. The self becomes the lens through which all experience is filtered. Praise gets woven into it, so does punishment. The mind begins defining itself by what it's told. You're good, you're bad, you're smart, you're not enough. And once these impressions take root, the brain doesn't just carry them, it defends them, even if they hurt. This is why people cling to old labels, why someone still feels worthless decades after the wound was inflicted, why an adult might panic at criticism, because somewhere deep inside, the child self still believes that love is conditional. The self is not a fluid concept, it becomes armor, and like armor, it gets heavy. The brain's job becomes protecting this identity. It filters information to reinforce it, rejects what doesn't align. It edits memory, perception, and emotion to keep the self coherent, even when that coherence is painful. This is why change feels threatening, why letting go of a belief, even a toxic one, feels like a small death, because to the brain it is. Even in therapy, people resist healing not because they don't want to get better, but because their self was shaped in fire, and stepping out of that story means losing the version of me they've carried for years. The haunting truth is this: the self was created by a child, and the adult has been defending it ever since, not out of weakness, but out of loyalty, because the brain doesn't forget who it had to become to survive. When people are watched, they behave more ethically, even if the watcher is a picture. There's something ancient that stirs in the human brain when eyes are on it. It doesn't matter who the eyes belong to. It doesn't even matter if they're real. Just the idea of being watched, two pupils staring back, printed on a wall or drawn on a sign, is enough to change behavior. People become kinder, more honest, more rule-abiding, as if their conscience suddenly got louder. This is the power of the watcher effect. In studies, researchers found that placing an image of eyes above a donation box increased contributions dramatically. In office break rooms, a photo of eyes posted above the coffee pot made employees pay more honestly for shared supplies. No camera, no person, just eyes. And the mind responded as if judgment had arrived. This response is primal. For most of human history, survival depended on reputation. To be seen breaking a rule, harming another, stealing, or lying was dangerous. It meant exile, rejection, vulnerability. So the brain evolved to fear the gaze, to associate eyes with consequence, with morality, with the weight of being seen. What's fascinating is that this response is so deeply wired, it doesn't require logic. People still react even when they know the eyes are fake. The amygdala, part of the brain that handles fear and social threat, activates at the sight of being watched. It doesn't ask questions, it just reacts. Even subtle stimuli, like someone facing them in a mirror or a barely visible image of a face, can trigger shifts in behavior. This is why surveillance works, even when it's symbolic. It's why we act differently in public than in private, why we check ourselves before speaking when a stranger glances over, and why guilt feels more intense when we think someone might know. The mind doesn't need proof, it just needs the possibility of being seen. But there's something almost tragic in this, because it means some people only act ethically when they feel observed. Their morality isn't rooted in principle, it's regulated by perception. And yet, it also means there's a hidden dignity inside most minds, a quiet fear of doing wrong, not because of punishment, but because someone, anyone, might be watching. Even if it's just a pair of painted eyes, even if it's just the ghost of conscience printed on a wall. Your memory of an event is altered every time you recall it. Every time a memory is pulled from the mind, it doesn't return unchanged. It bends, warps, rewrites, like a fragile document that smudges more with every touch. Each act of remembering subtly edits the past. You don't just recall a moment, you reconstruct it. And with every reconstruction, the original becomes further from truth. Neuroscience calls this process reconsolidation. When you remember something, your brain briefly stores it in a vulnerable, flexible state where new information, emotions, or suggestions can seep in and reshape it. Then it gets saved again, but now with alterations. The version of the memory you put back is not the same one you pulled out. This is why two people can remember the same event and tell completely different stories. It's not always deceit, it's decay. The mind tries to preserve meaning, not detail, and it edits memory to match who you are now, not who you were then. A breakup becomes colder, a childhood becomes lonelier, a triumph becomes dimmer or brighter, depending on how you need to feel today. Even the emotions surrounding the memory can shift. A moment that once made you laugh might now sting. A gesture once harmless might feel like betrayal, because your current emotional state acts like a filter, coloring what the memory becomes each time you summon it. This mental revision happens in subtle ways. You add conversations that never happened. You forget the way someone looked at you. You imagine background details, noises, smells. Your brain fills in gaps with its best guesses. And those guesses become truth in your mind, not because you're lying, but because the brain doesn't value accuracy as much as it values narrative. Memories aren't static. They're living, changing stories. They're shaped by time, identity, mood, even the presence of others. And with each retelling, whether spoken aloud or played silently in your head, you risk losing a little more of what actually happened. The most disturbing part? You never know it's happening. The memory always feels real, convincing, untouched. But it's not. What you're remembering is not the past. It's your last memory of the past, revised, softened, sharpened, distorted, then locked away again. Until next time, the mind can become addicted to its own negative thoughts. Negativity doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers constantly, a low, looping monologue of self-doubt, regret, jealousy, or fear. And the strange, devastating truth is this: the mind can become addicted to that voice. It can crave the familiar sting of its own darkness, not because it enjoys suffering, but because suffering, when repeated enough, starts to feel like home. This isn't poetic exaggeration, it's biology. Negative thoughts trigger the release of stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline. These chemicals prepare the body for danger, and over time, the body starts craving their hit. Just like a drug, Anxiety becomes a habit. Rumination becomes a ritual. Pain becomes a comfort zone. And the mind, wired for repetition, keeps returning even when the thoughts hurt. It starts with a single memory, a fear, a shame. You think about it once, then again. The neural pathway strengthens. The more often you revisit it, the more natural it becomes. Soon, it's automatic. You're brushing your teeth and suddenly, you're replaying a conversation from 3 years ago. You're trying to sleep and your brain drags you into a future disaster that hasn't happened. You're addicted and you don't even know it. But unlike physical addictions, there's no external substance to blame. The drug is internal, and worse, it's disguised as truth. The mind doesn't say, let's think negative thoughts. It says, let's be prepared. Let's be honest with ourselves. Let's figure this out before it happens. But what it's really doing is feeding the loop, feeding the ache, feeding the illusion that worry equals control. People often don't recognize this addiction because it's masked as intelligence. Overthinking is mistaken for being thorough. Self-criticism is mistaken for humility. But underneath it all is the same cycle: trigger, reaction, chemical reward. Just like an addict feels most alive when they're using, a chronically negative mind feels most alert when it's tearing itself apart. The saddest part? Many people spend years believing this voice is who they are, that the negativity is their personality, that they're just pessimistic or realistic. But it's not identity. It's a learned pattern, a feedback loop, a scar that kept reopening until it rewired the mind. Breaking that addiction takes awareness, compassion, repetition in the other direction. Because just as the mind can rehearse pain into permanence, it can rehearse peace. But first, it has to realize the suffering isn't destiny, it's habit. And habits can be broken, even the silent ones that live in thought. Laughter can occur in the brain before a joke is consciously understood. Laughter isn't always a reaction. It can be a prediction. Long before the conscious mind has finished decoding a punchline or grasped the meaning of a joke, the brain can already be laughing, not because it understands the words, but because it senses the pattern, the rhythm, the sudden twist in expectation. The circuitry of humor is faster than awareness, and sometimes the body erupts in laughter while the mind is still catching up. This is possible because humor, at its core, isn't intellectual, it's instinctual. It's a rapid-fire recognition of incongruity, a snap judgment that something is off, just enough to be safe and strange at the same time. The brain is constantly scanning for patterns, and when it detects a break in the expected flow, a word used wrong, a surprise ending, a reversal, it triggers the beginnings of a laugh before meaning even lands. Studies using EEG and fMRI scans have shown that neural activity in regions tied to amusement, the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, the temporal lobes, and even motor areas involved in smiling, can activate a split second before the subject reports understanding the joke. The body knows something funny is happening before the mind knows why. This is why people sometimes laugh at jokes they don't fully get, or why they burst out laughing at the tone, the delivery, the timing, only to realize the meaning a moment later. The physical response arrives like a ripple through the nervous system, driven by sound, structure, and social cues more than logic. It also explains contagious laughter. The brain detects laughter in others and mirrors it, creating the same joyful reaction even in the absence of understanding. Laughter spreads like fire, not because everyone gets the joke, but because the brain reacts to the signal. Something is safe, unexpected, and shared. This kind of laughter is primitive, pre-verbal. It's found in babies, in animals, in people separated by language. It's older than speech, rooted in the social brain, and it shows that humor isn't just entertainment, it's connection. The body leans into laughter because it knows, deep in the nervous system, that this is how humans bond, diffuse fear, and dance with the absurdity of life. even before the mind has had a chance to figure out the punchline. Deja vu is often the brain misfiring while processing real-time data. There's a moment, a flicker, when the world feels like it's already happened. You walk into a room, hear someone speak, or see a stranger's face, and something inside you says, "I've been here before." But you haven't. Not really. That eerie, almost mystical sensation is called déjà vu, and for all its strange beauty, it may be nothing more than a glitch in the mind's machinery, a brief misfire as the brain struggles to process the present. What déjà vu feels like is memory. What it actually is, many neuroscientists believe, is a processing error, a hiccup in the brain's ability to distinguish between something happening now and something stored in the past. It's as if a piece of your short-term experience skips the line, taking a wrong turn through memory systems and echoing back to you as familiarity before logic has time to catch up. In particular, researchers point to a momentary delay between two streams of perception. One signal hits consciousness first, the other follows milliseconds later, but the second feels like a repeat. So the brain tags the moment as a memory instead of what it truly is, brand new. That tiny lag creates a ripple of confusion, a present moment misfiled as the past. What makes déjà vu even stranger is how real it feels, not just like a familiar scene, but like a prediction fulfilled, like destiny brushing past you. It carries weight, emotion, even a sense of meaning. That's because the temporal lobe, especially the hippocampus, the part tied to memory and recognition, is briefly activated. It's the same brain area that lights up when you remember your childhood bedroom or an old friend's laugh. So your mind believes the experience is real, even though it can't find the source. And there's no warning. It happens to the logical, the skeptical, the spiritual. It cuts across belief systems and cultures. Some feel comforted by it, others unnerved, but nearly everyone feels haunted by it, if only for a moment. Déjà vu reminds us that perception is not perfect, that the mind isn't a camera, it's a constantly editing movie, spliced together in real time, and sometimes the editor makes a mistake. A frame repeats, a line echoes, and for a split second, the present feels like a ghost of something never lived, but deeply known. The brain can grieve a breakup as if mourning a death. When love ends, the body doesn't simply sigh and move on. It mourns, it aches, it unravels in the same places that grieve death. Because to the brain, loss is loss, and it doesn't always differentiate between someone who has died and someone who has simply chosen not to stay. The pain of heartbreak isn't symbolic, it's biological. The brain responds to a breakup with the same circuitry it uses when processing bereavement, lighting up the same regions responsible for emotional pain, attachment, and withdrawal. This is why breakups feel like something has died, because something has, not a person, but a future, a role, an entire imagined world built between two minds. And when that shared reality collapses, the brain panics. The attachment system, wired through evolution to cling for survival, suddenly finds nothing to hold. What once gave comfort now triggers panic. Neuroimaging shows that the anterior cingulate cortex, the region linked to the emotional component of physical pain, activates during heartbreak. So does the ventral tegmental area, which governs reward and craving. The same brain areas that light up when addicts go through withdrawal flare during a breakup. Love is not a metaphorical drug, it is a neurochemical one, and when it's taken away, the crash is real. Sleep becomes broken, appetite disappears, focus fractures, even the immune system weakens. The body is mourning, it is bracing against absence, and the mind, desperate for resolution, may replay memories like flashbacks, each one another blow to the nervous system, another confirmation that something precious has been lost. The danger is that modern culture often dismisses breakups as trivial compared to death, but the body doesn't agree. It enters a state of grief, even if the world tells it not to. And because the person still exists, somewhere out there, alive but unreachable, the pain can become more complex, more prolonged. The loss is ambiguous. The mind grieves someone who hasn't disappeared, and that lack of closure keeps the wounds open. So the tears, the withdrawal, the haunting need to hear their voice again, it's not weakness, it's mourning. The brain doesn't need a funeral to feel death. It only needs a sudden silence where love used to live. Your brain sometimes hears what it expects more than what's said. You think you're listening. You hear the words, the sound reaches your ears, but what your brain understands isn't always what was spoken. It's what it expected to hear. This isn't a failure of attention. It's a design feature. The brain is a prediction machine, constantly trying to stay one step ahead of reality. And sometimes, in its rush to make sense of the world, it fills in the blanks with what should be there instead of what is. This is why mishearing happens, even when the audio is crystal clear. Someone says, "I saw a deer in the field," but your brain hears, "I saw a deal in the field." Why? Because in that moment, deal made more sense in the context your mind had built. The brain leaned into the assumption. It edited reality. At the core of this is something called top-down processing. Rather than passively absorbing sound, the brain interprets it through layers of expectation, past experience, emotional tone, and context. If someone speaks in an accent you're not used to, or uses phrasing that's unfamiliar, your brain doesn't wait. It guesses. And once that guess is made, it can be hard to unhear it, even when corrected. This is also why two people can hear the same sentence and walk away with entirely different interpretations. The words were the same, but the filters were not. One person's brain filled in silence with safety, another's filled it with threat. The message you hear is never just about the speaker. It's a reflection of your inner model of the world. This tendency to hear what we expect extends into relationships, conflict, politics, even love. When someone says, "I'm fine," the brain may hear, "I'm angry." If that's what history has taught you to expect, when a partner offers neutral feedback, a person who expects criticism might hear an attack. What's spoken becomes less important than what your mind believes is being said underneath. It's not just hearing, it's meaning-making, and the mind would rather be fast than accurate. But in that speed, something essential is lost: truth. Because when you're not really listening to them, you're listening to you, your fears, your history, your narrative. And sometimes, to hear clearly, you have to silence what you expect to hear. Only then can the voice in front of you become louder than the one inside. Phantom phone vibrations are real sensations generated by the nervous system. You feel it, your pocket buzzes, you reach for your phone, nothing's there, no message, no call, just silence. And yet, the sensation was undeniable. That brief, unmistakable vibration that never happened. It's called phantom vibration syndrome, and it's not just your imagination. It's your nervous system creating a false alert, a ghost signal, a body-level hallucination sparked by habit, expectation, and the overstimulated circuitry of modern life. This phenomenon is disturbingly common. Millions experience it. People swear they felt the vibration. Some even hear the sound. But when they check, their phone is idle, still. The mind has tricked the body, or maybe the body has tricked the mind. Either way, it's real. The sensation comes from the same sensory pathways that respond to actual touch. Over time, the brain becomes conditioned to expect communication. Every ding, ping, and buzz trains your nervous system like a dog anticipating a bell, and eventually your body starts firing without a stimulus. It's not just a reflex. It's learned behavior, written into muscle memory and sensory maps. Your brain is so primed to detect a message that it begins to hallucinate one. What's unsettling is how much this mimics other conditions. Just like an amputee can feel a missing limb, or someone in grief hears a loved one's voice, the brain can fabricate presence where it's absent. And with smartphones, devices tied to urgency, validation, and identity, those false signals feel urgent, important, emotional. Stress makes it worse. Fatigue, anxiety, social expectation, all of it increases the likelihood. And yet, most people brush it off. They laugh, shrug, move on. But behind that moment of confusion is a deeper truth. The mind is no longer waiting for technology. It's trying to become it. Phantom vibrations are the nervous system whispering, "You're needed, you're wanted, something's happening," even when nothing is. They reveal how tightly woven our minds have become with our devices, so tightly that the body now speaks in the language of notifications, buzzes that aren't real but feel like they are, sensations from a world that lives half in your hand and half in your brain. Your sense of time stretches or shrinks, depending on your focus. Time isn't fixed, it's elastic. It bends quietly beneath your attention, warping to match your focus. A minute can feel like an hour when you're anxious. An hour can vanish like smoke when you're in flow. This isn't just poetic language, it's how the brain actually works. Time isn't something you observe, it's something you experience. And that experience changes depending on where your mind goes. When you're hyper-focused, fully absorbed in what you're doing, time compresses. Hours melt away without notice. This is the flow state, where your brain stops tracking time because it doesn't need to. Everything unnecessary is trimmed away. Distractions, self-consciousness, the ticking clock. You become a pure moment of action. The mind stops measuring and starts being. But when you're waiting, worrying, or bored, time stretches. Your brain scans for stimuli, finds nothing, and begins to mark time more deliberately. Seconds become milestones. Every glance at the clock feels like betrayal. In these moments, you're not in the present. You're in resistance. And resistance thickens time. Pain slows it down. So does uncertainty. This happens because time perception isn't handled by a single part of the brain. It's spread across memory centers, emotion circuits, attention systems. When your focus narrows, your brain groups moments together. It compresses them. When your mind wanders or spirals, the brain separates each second, giving weight to what would otherwise pass unnoticed. This is why a joyful day feels short in the moment, but rich in hindsight. Your mind didn't mark every minute, but your memory captured the depth, and why traumatic moments feel frozen, endless. The brain goes into hyper-recording mode, and time fractures into slow-motion snapshots. Focus and emotion combine to alter your internal clock. Even novelty stretches time. When you experience something new, the brain pays more attention. It lays down more detail. This is why childhood summers felt eternal. Your brain was absorbing everything. As you age, routine speeds time up. Days blur, weeks vanish. Life feels faster, not because it is, but because you're noticing less. You don't just live time, you shape it with your focus, with your emotion, with the stories you tell about the hours passing. And once you realize this, time stops being something that happens to you. It becomes something you can influence, minute by minute, attention by attention, because the truth is, the clock never moves, only you do. You are more creative when slightly drowsy. The mind loosens its grip just before sleep. In that hazy space where focus fades and logic thins, creativity awakens. It's not an accident, it's biology. When you're slightly drowsy, not fully awake, not fully asleep, the brain becomes more fluid, more permissive, more willing to explore connections it would normally discard. The inner critic grows quiet, the filters drop, and suddenly, strange ideas begin to bloom in the soil of distraction. This state, sometimes called hypnagogia, is a psychological twilight where imagination stretches without resistance. It's where dreams begin to sneak into waking thought, and the boundaries between real and unreal start to blur. Artists, writers, and inventors have long drawn from this in-between world, tapping it for insights that felt too bizarre, too bold, or too brilliant to emerge under the harsh light of full alertness. Thomas Edison used to drift off with metal balls in his hands, waking the moment they dropped, snatching ideas from the threshold of sleep. Salvador Dali did the same. Their goal wasn't rest, it was access. Because in those moments, the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain that governs logic and inhibition, relaxes, and without it blocking every weird or risky idea, creativity runs freer. This is why ideas often arrive in the shower, in bed, on long walks, not when trying but when drifting. When the mind is unfocused enough to stumble upon brilliance, the drowsy brain is not lazy, it's associative. It lets things touch that usually don't. It lets metaphors take shape. It lets daydreams unfold into solutions. But it's fragile. Push too far into sleep, and the thoughts vanish. Stay too alert, and the creativity stiffens. The magic happens in that soft middle, where the mind is half surrendered. It's why night owls often feel more inspired at midnight, and why morning people sometimes wake with answers they didn't fall asleep with. This truth rewrites how creativity is understood. It's not always born from discipline. Sometimes it slips through the cracks when the mind is untethered just enough to wander into genius, a kind of productive vulnerability, a drowsy doorway through which the most unexpected thoughts arrive, quiet, strange, and suddenly exactly right. The brain sometimes replays traumatic memories without your permission. You're washing dishes, walking to work, lying in bed, half asleep, and then suddenly it's back. A memory you didn't ask for, a scene you thought was buried, a sound, a flash, a feeling that tightens your chest and pulls you into the past like a riptide. You didn't choose it, you didn't summon it, but your brain did. This is the haunting truth. Traumatic memories don't always stay where you leave them. Sometimes they come back on their own, loud, vivid, and uninvited. This isn't weakness, it's wiring. The brain treats trauma differently than it treats ordinary memory. Under extreme stress, the amygdala, your emotional alarm system, goes into overdrive, while the hippocampus, responsible for organizing time and sequence, can shut down or go offline. The result is that traumatic memories often aren't filed away like normal ones. They're not stories, they're fragments, raw, sensory, unfinished, and because they weren't properly processed, they float, ready to be triggered at any moment. It could be a smell, a phrase, a certain light in a room, and suddenly you're there again, not remembering it, reliving it. Your heart pounds, your muscles tighten, your breath shortens. The body reacts as if the threat is still happening, because to the brain, in that moment, it is. This is called an intrusive memory, and it's common in people with PTSD, anxiety, and unresolved grief. But it can happen to anyone. Trauma rewires the nervous system to stay on high alert, always scanning, always bracing. And when the brain detects something even vaguely similar to the original trauma, it doesn't ask your permission. It pulls the file, plays the tape, and you're caught in the loop. What's worse, the more these memories replay, the more they reinforce themselves. Neurons that fire together, wire together. So every uninvited replay can deepen the groove in the brain, making it easier to trigger again. It becomes a circuit, a trap, a place the mind returns to over and over, not out of desire, but out of reflex. But knowing this doesn't mean you're powerless. It means your brain is trying, desperately, to make sense of something it still doesn't understand. It's not punishing you. It's signaling that a wound is still open. And while you can't always stop the memory from coming, you can change how you meet it. Not with fear, but with compassion. Not with silence, but with healing. Because sometimes the memory repeats not to hurt you, but to finally be heard. Yawning is socially contagious, even through text or thought. You read the word yawn, and suddenly you feel it creeping in. That slow breath, the widening jaw, the stretch behind your eyes. It doesn't matter that no one yawned near you. It doesn't matter that there's no sound, no face, no physical trigger. Just the idea is enough. Yawning is one of the strangest reflexes in the human experience, one that crosses the barrier between body and thought, because it isn't just physical, it's social, it's psychological, it's deeply primal. Contagious yawning isn't just mimicry, it's empathy in action. When someone yawns, your brain subconsciously tunes in, mirror neurons fire, the social brain responds, and before you know it, you're doing it too, not because you're tired, but because you're wired to connect. What's even stranger is that this response doesn't require seeing someone yawn. It can be triggered by hearing it, reading about it, even thinking about it. Right now, in this exact moment, your brain may already be preparing to yawn just because we're talking about it. This reflex reveals a hidden language, a neurological dance shared among humans, and even some animals like chimpanzees and dogs. Scientists believe it's tied to social bonding, a way to synchronize group behavior. One person yawns, others follow, and suddenly the group is united in a rhythm they don't consciously control. But not everyone catches it. People with high levels of empathy are more likely to yawn when others do. Those on the autism spectrum or with certain neurological conditions often don't. This simple, involuntary act becomes a window into the emotional architecture of the mind, how connected you are, how deeply you feel, what others feel. And it's not just psychological. Yawning itself has physiological functions, cooling the brain, increasing alertness, resetting the body. But when it spreads without physical cause, something deeper is happening. A thought becomes sensation, a symbol becomes reflex. So the next time you yawn, and you will, ask yourself, whose emotion did I just borrow? Whose fatigue? Whose silence? Whose signal did my body just answer? Because a yawn, small and simple as it seems, is not just a sign of tiredness. It's a whisper from the social mind, reminding you that you're not alone. People can develop multiple personalities, each with distinct brainwave patterns. Inside a single skull, there can be more than one identity, completely separate, unaware of each other, each with its own name, voice, preferences, memories, and even brainwaves. This isn't metaphor. It's a documented phenomenon known as dissociative identity disorder, DID, and it reveals something both staggering and terrifying about the human mind. It can split itself, not just emotionally, but neurologically. People with DID don't just pretend to be different versions of themselves. When one identity, known as an alter, takes control, everything changes. Their posture, tone, vocabulary, even their allergies or eyesight can shift. Brain scans show that different alters exhibit distinct neural activity, as if entirely separate people were being studied. EEG readings can show one alter in a calm, meditative state, while another, seconds later, lights up with high-frequency beta waves linked to stress or trauma. The brain is not simply acting, it's reorganizing. Some alters speak different languages, some have different genders, ages, or worldviews. Some don't even know the others exist. And when one alter is present, the others may vanish into amnesia, leaving gaps in time that feel like blackouts. What's more haunting is that this isn't done on purpose. It's not manipulation, it's survival. DID is almost always linked to severe trauma in early childhood, often chronic abuse. When the pain becomes unbearable and the mind cannot flee physically, it flees psychologically. It fragments. One part of the self holds the pain, while another is built to protect, to hide, to carry on. Over time, these parts become more than coping mechanisms. They become people, not masks, not moods, actual neurological identities with their own patterns, memories, and purposes. This disorder challenges everything believed about selfhood, that a person is a single, unified consciousness, that there's only one you behind the eyes. Did says otherwise. It shows the mind's ability to compartmentalize to such an extreme that it creates a mental democracy where different identities take turns at the helm, sometimes harmoniously, often in chaos. But what's even more remarkable than the splitting is the structure. These identities aren't random. They serve roles: protector, child, avenger, caretaker. The brain doesn't break down, it adapts, and in doing so reveals just how powerful and how fragile the boundaries of identity really are. Inside one brain, there can live many truths, many selves, and sometimes the mind must divide to survive. Music can activate more areas of the brain than language. Music doesn't just enter the ears, it invades the entire brain. While language is mostly processed in specialized regions like Broca's and Wernicke's areas, music lights up a neural fireworks display. It activates emotional centers, memory networks, motor pathways, and even regions linked to vision and reward. The brain doesn't treat music like sound. It treats it like experience, like emotion, like meaning without words. From the very first note, the auditory cortex begins decoding pitch and rhythm, but almost instantly, deeper systems come online. The limbic system, home to emotion, lights up, pulling in memories, feelings, and mood. The motor cortex starts responding, even if the body doesn't move. That's why feet tap and heads nod unconsciously. The cerebellum, responsible for timing and coordination, starts syncing with the beat, and dopamine floods the brain's reward system, not unlike what happens during food, sex, or laughter. But it doesn't stop there. Music reaches into language areas too, even when no lyrics are present. It stimulates the prefrontal cortex, the seat of planning, anticipation, and abstract thinking. It stirs the hippocampus, where long-term memories are stored. That's why a few chords can transport someone decades into the past, summoning a face, a scent, a moment they thought was gone. What's even stranger is how music can reach people when language cannot. Stroke victims who lose speech can sometimes still sing. Alzheimer's patients, silent for months, will hum tunes from childhood. Music accesses parts of the brain untouched by disease or trauma. It becomes a backdoor into locked rooms, a code that bypasses decay. This is why lullabies soothe before a baby understands words, why funeral songs bring tears even in foreign languages, why certain melodies feel like home even when heard for the first time. Music speaks not just to who you are, but to every version of you that has ever lived. Language is how we explain the world. Music is how we feel it. It's vibration that becomes emotion, structure that becomes soul. And in the brain, it isn't just processed, it's lived, with more reach, more depth, more universality than any sentence could ever achieve. The brain can perceive faces in random objects automatically, pareidolia. You've seen them, a face in the clouds, a smile in the foam of your coffee, eyes staring back from the front of a car. You weren't trying to see a face, but there it was, clear, familiar, emotional. This isn't just imagination, it's a neurological reflex. The human brain is hardwired to find faces, even where none exist. This eerie tendency is called pareidolia, and it reveals just how obsessed your mind is with finding people, even in shadows and shapes. The brain's face detection system is incredibly fast, so fast that it sometimes fires before logic can catch up. It's located primarily in a region called the fusiform face area, FFA, and its job is simple: spot faces, recognize expressions, and assess intent. But it's not cautious. It doesn't wait for confirmation. It leaps to conclusions. If something might be a face, the brain says, yes, that's a face, even if it's a tree knot, an outlet, or the front of a building. This reflex is rooted in evolution. For early humans, recognizing a face, friend, or threat could mean survival. Missing a face in the shadows might mean death. Seeing a face where there wasn't one? Harmless. So the brain adapted to favor false positives. It still does. And it doesn't just recognize features, it assigns emotion. A window becomes surprise. A potato looks smug. A backpack seems sad. Your mind creates a personality for something that doesn't even blink. Children experience pareidolia even more intensely. Their developing brains are constantly searching for meaning. So, a toy pile or a wallpaper pattern can become alive. But adults do it too, especially when feeling lonely, anxious, or emotionally heightened. The brain wants to connect. It wants to see life. And in silence, in solitude, it makes faces out of whatever it can. This phenomenon also explains why people see religious figures in toast, monsters in clouds, or ghosts in static. It's not madness. It's the brain doing its job, constructing familiarity out of randomness. But it's also a window into something deeper, the longing for recognition, the hunger to see and be seen, even if it's by the pattern in your carpet. Pareidolia is not a flaw. It's a glimpse into how the mind turns chaos into comfort, how it weaves emotion into shapes, and how, even when alone, the brain finds company in the shadows. Your body can flinch in response to imagined threats. You picture a knife slipping, a car swerving, a fall from a high ledge. Nothing is actually happening, but your muscles tighten, your breath shortens. A jolt runs through your shoulders, your neck, your spine. The flinch comes fast, instinctive, protective, and it happens even when the danger is only in your mind. Because to the brain, imagining threat can be just as real as facing it. This reflex is ancient. Its survival hardwired into muscle memory. Long before rational thought can intervene, the body prepares for impact. But the brain doesn't require physical stimulus to trigger it. If a thought carries enough weight, enough fear, enough vividness, the nervous system responds without question. The amygdala, the brain's alarm bell, doesn't wait for confirmation. It detects emotional content. A mental image, sharp enough to resemble danger, is all it takes. The visual cortex fires as if you're seeing it. The motor cortex primes the muscles. The adrenal system tenses. And suddenly, your body is preparing to dodge something that isn't there. This is why watching a horror movie makes your stomach clench, why reading about violence can make your palms sweat, why thinking of an awkward moment from years ago can send a ripple of physical discomfort through your chest. The body isn't being dramatic, it's responding to the mind's broadcast of threat. What's even more haunting is how these flinches add up. Over time, chronic exposure to imagined danger, worry, overthinking, mental rehearsals of worst-case scenarios can keep the body locked in a semi-defensive state. Shoulders raised, jaw clenched, gut tight, muscles sore from battles that never happen, and the mind rarely notices. It says, it's just a thought, but the body disagrees. It responds with tension, reflex, and alarm, because it doesn't know the threat is imaginary. It only knows the signal feels real. This truth is unsettling. The mind has the power to wound without touching, to scare without showing, to make the body flinch from ghosts. You don't need trauma in your environment to feel unsafe. Sometimes the battlefield is within, and your body still braces for impact. Smells are more emotionally powerful than visuals due to brain structure. You don't just smell a scent, you relive it. A whiff of perfume, a trace of rain on hot pavement, the faint musk of old books, and suddenly you're transported, not just in memory but in feeling. Your stomach drops, your chest tightens, your eyes sting, not from the smell, but from the story it unlocks. What makes this so intense, so sudden, so alive is not imagination, it's wiring. Smell is the only sense that bypasses the brain's logical filters and goes straight to emotion. Unlike sight, sound, or touch, which are processed first through the thalamus, the brain's relay station, smell takes a direct route to the amygdala and hippocampus, the regions responsible for emotion, fear, and memory. That shortcut means scent is tied to feeling at the deepest level. There's no delay, no translation, just instant access to the raw file drawer of the soul. This is why the smell of a certain soap can make a grown adult cry, why the scent of a childhood dish can bring someone to their knees, why a trace of cigarette smoke can feel like betrayal or love, depending on the life behind it. Smells don't just remind you of the past, they recreate it. Visually, you might remember a moment. Olfactorily, you return to it. What's more haunting is how involuntary it all is. You don't choose to remember. You don't prepare for the rush. A scent hits, and the emotion follows, often before you know why. It's not just a cue, it's a key, and the door it opens often swings wide with memories you thought were long sealed. This power of scent is why trauma survivors often react strongly to smells others barely notice. It's why certain aromas feel sacred, erotic, dangerous, or comforting without explanation. The brain doesn't need words when it comes to smell. It just feels. While visuals can be stunning, they're filtered, organized, framed, but scent goes deeper. It bypasses narrative. It strikes the core, and because of that, it leaves traces where nothing else can reach. In the end, scent isn't just a sense. It's a portal, a ghost, a thread tying who you were to who you are, so fragile, so precise, that the right breeze can unravel your entire past in a single breath. People become more honest in dark rooms. Something strange happens when the lights go out. The masks loosen, the voice softens, the truth begins to slip through. In dim lighting or complete darkness, people often reveal more, confess more, feel less compelled to hide. It's not because darkness changes who they are. It changes what they feel exposed to. With fewer eyes watching, judgment feels distant. And when judgment fades, honesty rushes in. This isn't just metaphor, it's measurable. Psychological studies have shown that people are more likely to disclose personal information, express vulnerable emotions, and speak uncomfortable truths when sitting in dimly lit rooms. The absence of harsh light creates a sense of psychological safety. The brain, constantly scanning for social cues and threats, relaxes when it can't be fully seen. In bright light, the social self takes center stage, the curated identity, the performance. But in darkness, the need to maintain image weakens. You're not being watched, you're not being scrutinized, and without that pressure, the deeper parts of the mind feel safe enough to speak. It's why secrets are shared under blankets, why confessions spill out during late-night car rides, why lovers speak softer in the dark. Darkness isn't empty, it's intimate. It holds space without staring back, and the brain, wired to guard itself under observation, lets go when the world can't see its eyes. But it's more than safety, it's disinhibition. The darkness strips away the subtle visual feedback that usually guides self-monitoring. Without mirrors, without glances, without the subtle tightening of someone else's jaw, the mind becomes less concerned with consequence and more focused on expression. You don't just feel safer, you feel freer. Of course, this honesty isn't always gentle. In darkness, people may admit things they've buried, regrets, desires, doubts, truths they avoid in the daylight. The shadows give those truths permission to exist, and once spoken, they often cannot be unspoken. So while the world fears darkness as a place of concealment, it also serves as a stage for the unspoken, a quiet space where the brain, unshackled by scrutiny, allows the truth to rise, not because the person has changed, but because, for once, they don't feel the need to hide. Love and obsession activate nearly identical brain regions. Love is supposed to be pure, obsession, toxic. One uplifts, the other consumes. But to the brain, the line between them isn't a line at all. It's a blur, a dangerous, electrified blur, because whether you're falling in love or spiraling into obsession, the same neural regions light up, the same chemicals surge, the same reward circuits fire like fireworks. In the language of your biology, love and obsession speak in the same dialect. The difference lies not in where they strike, but in how far they go. In both states, dopamine floods the system, that same neurotransmitter responsible for addiction, reward, and craving. It hits the nucleus accumbens, the ventral tegmental area, the caudate nucleus, regions associated with desire, pleasure, and fixation. Love isn't soft in the brain, it's intense, euphoric, and when something interrupts it, distance, jealousy, silence, the craving intensifies. Just like withdrawal, in romantic love, this system can bring two people closer. In obsession, it can swallow one whole. Both create focus, but obsession is a spotlight that never shuts off. It erases perspective. It rewires attention. The beloved becomes a fixation, not a person, a goal, not a partner. The brain doesn't just want them, it needs them with the same hunger a drug addict feels for their next hit. Oxytocin and vasopressin, the so-called love hormones, also play a role. They increase trust, bonding, and emotional memory, but they don't judge. They don't distinguish between healthy attachment and unhealthy compulsion. In obsession, these hormones can trap someone in emotional loops, tied to a person who may not love them back or may not even be real. MRI scans of people in the throes of romantic love and those with obsessive-compulsive disorder show eerie similarities, overlapping brain regions, identical activation patterns. One person is falling deeply in love, another is checking locks or washing their hands for the 10th time. But to the brain, the emotional architecture is nearly the same. I can't stop. I don't want to stop. I need this. This is why love can feel terrifying, why heartbreak can mimic withdrawal, why people risk everything for someone they barely know. Because love isn't just a feeling, it's a neurological storm, a chemical possessiveness, and if untethered, it can tip quietly, tragically, into obsession, not because the heart changed its mind, but because the brain never learned the difference. Children can remember languages they were exposed to in the womb, long before a baby speaks. Even before it cries for the first time, its brain is already learning the rhythm of language. Inside the womb, muffled by layers of skin and fluid, the fetus listens. It hears the melody of its mother's voice, the rise and fall of sentences, the lull of vowels, the sharpness of consonants, and what it hears stays. Infants, even hours after birth, show clear preference and recognition for the languages they heard before they were born. Not the words themselves, the music of the language, its emotional cadence, its shape. Studies using pacifier sucking tests and brain imaging have shown that newborns respond more strongly to their mother's native language than to foreign tongues. Babies born to bilingual mothers show familiarity with both languages, reacting to each with different facial expressions or heart rate changes. This is not coincidence. It is memory, formed not in words, but in sound patterns. The auditory system begins functioning around the 3rd trimester, and during that time, the fetus receives a constant stream of filtered speech. Low frequencies travel best through amniotic fluid, meaning it's the deeper rhythmic qualities of language that make the strongest impression. The brain stores these impressions, even though it has no concept of meaning. What it records is familiarity. This early exposure doesn't just fade, it shapes future language development. Children exposed to a language in utero, even if they never hear it again after birth, learn that language faster and with better pronunciation if reintroduced years later. Their brains already carry the fingerprints of that language's sound structure, a forgotten memory that still lives in their neurons. This is why adoptees, relocated as infants, can sometimes relearn their birth language with uncanny ease. Something deep within recognizes the sound. A door reopens. not because the child ever understood the words, but because their body felt them before they even had a name. It reveals something beautiful and eerie, that memory begins not with understanding, but with resonance, that the earliest traces of self may come from a language once heard in darkness, in water, in rhythm with a mother's breath, a language not learned but absorbed before life even began in the world. You are most likely to have life-altering ideas during boring activities. The eureka moment doesn't usually come under pressure. It rarely shows up when you're staring at a blank screen or forcing brilliance out of exhaustion. Instead, it sneaks in during the quiet, while you're folding laundry, taking a shower, staring out a window with no intention at all. Boredom, so often dismissed as useless, is actually one of the brain's most fertile states. It's the pause where transformation begins. During routine, low-stimulation activities, your brain slips into what's known as the default mode network, a kind of mental idle that activates when you're not focused on any task. But this idle state is anything but lazy. It's where deep reflection, imagination, and problem-solving bloom. It's the stage behind the curtain where your mind assembles fragments of memory, emotion, experience, and knowledge and weaves them into something entirely new. When you're bored, your brain has space. Space to wander. Space to connect things you didn't know were related. This is why answers to complicated problems often come not while thinking hard, but while doing nothing at all. The mind needs room to breathe, to drift, to explore the backroads of thought. In boredom, it roams beyond urgency and slips into creativity. Life-altering insights rarely come from relentless focus. They come from defocused attention, when the brain is relaxed enough to let go of control, but alert enough to explore. This is why showers, long walks, and commutes have earned reputations as idea factories. They don't inspire, they allow. They create a gentle void, and the mind fills it. But there's a catch. Modern life is designed to kill boredom. Every spare second is filled with noise, scrolling, streaming, scrolling again. The moment the brain begins to quiet, something interrupts, and with it, the door to those deeper ideas slams shut. You don't need more stimulation to be creative. You need less. The truth is, boredom is not the enemy of productivity. It's the gateway to vision, to revelation, to the ideas that change not just your mind, but your life. The next big shift won't come while you're striving for it. It'll come while you're rinsing dishes, zoning out in traffic, staring at a ceiling fan with no plan at all. Because that's when the brain finally whispers the thing it's been dying to say. And for once, you're quiet enough to hear it. Self-control depletes like a battery. Over the day, willpower is not an endless resource. It's more like a battery, charged in the morning, drained by every decision, every temptation resisted, every emotion suppressed. As the hours pass, the ability to say no, to stay focused, to be patient or kind, slowly erodes. And the scariest part? The mind rarely notices the depletion. You just snap, or give in, or shut down. Not because you're weak, but because the fuel is gone. This phenomenon is known as ego depletion. Psychologists have found that acts of self-control, whether avoiding junk food, biting your tongue in a conversation, or staying on task, consume mental energy. And as that energy is used up, the brain becomes less capable of exerting control over impulses. By the end of the day, something as simple as choosing what to eat or replying kindly can feel impossible. This is why diets often fail at night, why arguments flare up at dinner, why scrolling replaces sleep and discipline collapses into indulgence. The decisions of the morning feel like they were made by a different person, because in a way, they were. That person had more cognitive power, more access to restraint. Studies even show that people are more ethical, rational, and patient earlier in the day. Judges grant more favorable rulings in the morning. Workers make fewer errors. People donate more, lie less, and procrastinate less before their willpower reservoir begins to run dry. And it's not just about resisting bad habits. It affects everything: motivation, focus, emotional regulation, creativity. When self-control is depleted, the mind begins to seek shortcuts, easy dopamine, immediate relief, anything that requires less effort and promises quick comfort. The problem is that modern life rarely lets the battery recharge. Constant notifications, decision overload, social demands, it all drains the system faster. And when the mind runs on empty, even small challenges feel overwhelming. Yet we blame ourselves. We think, I was doing so well. Why did I fall apart? The answer is invisible. Your self-control was spent, not permanently, just momentarily, like a phone blinking red. And the only real solution isn't guilt. It's recovery, rest, refueling. Because self-control isn't about being unbreakable. It's about managing energy, protecting it, recharging it, and understanding that the mind isn't a fortress. It's a flickering light, strongest at sunrise, dimmest at dusk, unless you give it time to shine again. Brains synchronize when people deeply connect in conversation. There's something mysterious that happens when two people truly connect, not just exchanging words, but feeling understood. It's more than chemistry, more than eye contact or shared laughter. Underneath the surface, their brains begin to synchronize. Literally, their neural rhythms align, firing in similar patterns as if their minds are dancing to the same invisible beat. This phenomenon is called interbrain synchrony, and it's one of the most intimate, invisible miracles of human connection. Studies using fMRI and EEG scans have shown that when two people engage in deep, authentic conversation, their brainwaves begin to mirror each other. Regions responsible for language, empathy, and attention light up in harmony. It's not just that one person understands the other, it's that their brains are physically syncing. This doesn't happen with every interaction. Small talk, scripted exchanges, surface-level chatter, those rarely spark it. But when people share emotion, vulnerability, or genuine curiosity, the neural rhythm begins to hum in unison. It's like two instruments tuning to the same note, not through effort but through resonance. What's even more astonishing is that this alignment isn't just a side effect of good conversation, it enhances it. Once two brains begin to sync, communication flows more easily. Understanding deepens. Nonverbal cues are processed more accurately. Laughter becomes contagious. Silences feel safe. The connection becomes self-sustaining. This is why you can talk to someone for hours and feel like no time has passed, why you can finish each other's sentences, why you leave certain conversations feeling energized, seen, even transformed. Your brain didn't just process words, it shared a rhythm, and that rhythm left an imprint. It's also why disconnection feels so jarring. When someone isn't present, when they're distracted or guarded, the brain recognizes the mismatch. The rhythm breaks. Words may still be exchanged, but the dance is gone. You feel it not just emotionally, but neurologically, like trying to waltz with someone walking in another direction. In the end, conversation isn't just about transmitting information, it's about harmonizing experience. Two minds reaching out across space and time, seeking not just to speak, but to merge. And when that happens, something rare and sacred takes place, not in the words, but in the silence between them. That silence where both brains pulse together, saying, I'm with you, I get it, we're here. Some blind people still perceive light without knowing how. There are individuals who live in complete darkness, legally blind, with no conscious vision. Yet, when placed in a room, they can somehow tell whether the lights are on or off, not by heat, not by sound, but by something deeper, stranger. They don't see light in the way most people do. They feel it without knowing how. This rare phenomenon is called non-visual photoreception, and it reveals that even in blindness, the body can sense what the eyes cannot. The key lies in cells behind the eyes that have nothing to do with vision. They're not rods or cones, the tools of sight. There's something else. Photosensitive retinal ganglion cells. These cells don't form images, they don't build shapes or color, but they respond to light. They send signals directly to areas of the brain that control sleep, alertness, and biological rhythms, and they remain functional even in people who are otherwise completely blind. In one experiment, blind participants were exposed to blue light without being told. They reported no awareness of anything changing, yet brain scans showed increased alertness. Their bodies responded, their circadian clocks shifted. One man, blind since childhood, consistently guessed whether a room's lights were on without ever once seeing a thing. This suggests the body carries a second kind of vision, primitive, unconscious, and ancient, a way of detecting brightness and darkness not through sight, but through sensation, through a biological whisper that says, light is here. It's haunting because it means that blindness, even total, may not be absolute, that there is still a conversation between the body and the world, quiet, hidden, but ongoing. These people cannot describe what they perceive. There's no image, no outline, just a certainty, an internal shift. Something has changed, something is glowing. This subtle form of light perception doesn't help with navigation, it doesn't restore independence, but it reveals that human awareness is more than consciousness, that the body, in its silence, is always listening, always sensing. So even in darkness, real, permanent, unchangeable darkness, some part of the self still knows when the sun rises, not by sight, but by something older, something wordless, a forgotten signal pulsing beneath perception, saying, wake up, the light has returned. You can hear your name being said, even in white noise. You could be in a crowded room, a noisy airport, or half asleep with static pouring from a TV screen, and still, somehow, you'll hear it. Your name, whispered, distant, clear as glass in the chaos. You snap to attention, you look around, but no one called you. Nothing was said, and yet your brain is convinced, because this isn't just a trick of the ears. It's proof of how deeply your name is wired into your identity, so deeply that your mind listens for it, even when it's not there. This phenomenon is tied to something called the cocktail party effect, your brain's uncanny ability to zero in on personally relevant information, even in a sea of meaningless noise. Your name is the sharpest trigger. It doesn't just sound familiar, it feels like you. It's the auditory fingerprint your mind was trained to recognize from childhood, long before you knew what it meant. And now it carries a weight that can cut through silence, music, traffic, even nothingness. When you hear random static, your brain doesn't process it passively. It scans, it hunts for patterns, rhythms, anything familiar. This process is driven by predictive coding, the brain's constant effort to match incoming signals with what it expects or wants to hear, and your name sits at the top of that hierarchy. So if the white noise even vaguely resembles the cadence, pitch, or rhythm of your name, your brain fills in the gap and says, there, that's for me. What's wild is that this happens even when you're not fully conscious. People have reported hearing their name in the middle of sleep, in dreams, or during deep meditation. It's not hallucination, it's hypersensitivity. Your name bypasses logical processing and taps directly into arousal networks in the brain. That's why you jolt when it's said, even gently. It doesn't just register, it awakens. This reflex is so finely tuned that it sometimes fires falsely. You hear your name in a fan's hum, a breeze, or a random jumble of conversation, and the brain doesn't apologize. It believes what it heard, because to your mind, your name isn't just a word, it's a summons, an alert, a thread tethered to selfhood. So even in chaos, even in pure white noise, the part of your brain that listens for you is always awake, waiting, ready to answer. The unconscious mind is faster, smarter, and more powerful than the conscious one. The thoughts you hear, the voice narrating your day, the decisions you think you're making, the logic you believe you're using, are only a sliver of what your mind is actually doing. Beneath the surface of awareness, in a realm without words or control, the unconscious mind is running the show, quietly, constantly, and with more speed, insight, and influence than the conscious mind could ever match. It processes information up to 500,000 times faster. It takes in sounds, smells, facial expressions, body language, temperature, posture, and threat before you even realize you're in a room. You think you chose to sit a certain way, say a certain thing, trust a certain person, but often the choice was made milliseconds before you became aware of it. The conscious mind is not the commander. It's the press secretary, explaining choices it didn't initiate. Experiments with brain scans show that decisions can be predicted seconds before someone believes they've made them. Participants press a button thinking it was a spontaneous choice, but the unconscious brain activity revealed the decision before the person felt it. The conscious mind is late to its own party, and the unconscious doesn't just act fast, it acts brilliantly. It solves complex problems while you sleep. It deciphers patterns in human behavior you couldn't articulate. It fuels your intuition, those gut feelings that are often more accurate than deliberate analysis. In high-stakes situations like reacting to danger or reading emotional subtext, the unconscious brain outperforms logical reasoning. It's not slower, it's smarter. But it's also deeply emotional. It stores every experience, every wound, every early impression that shaped your personality. It remembers what the conscious mind forgets, and it uses that archive to shape your worldview, who you trust, what you fear, how you react when someone raises their voice. This is why change is so hard. The conscious mind sets goals, but the unconscious mind guards identity. It keeps patterns in place, even the harmful ones, because they feel familiar, and familiarity feels safe. The conscious mind is where we think we live, but the unconscious is where we actually exist. It is the pilot behind every instinct, the author of most of our behavior, and the true source of the self. Not loud, not logical, but powerful, precise, and endlessly awake, even when you are not. You can feel touch in a limb that's been amputated. It's gone, flesh, bone, nerves, cut away, but the touch remains, the itch, the ache, the curl of fingers that no longer exist. This is not imagination. It's a phenomenon known as phantom limb sensation, and it's one of the most haunting truths about the human brain. It remembers the body even after it's gone, and sometimes it won't let go. Up to 90% of people who undergo amputation continue to feel sensations in the missing limb, tingling, temperature, movement, even pain. Some say they can still feel their hand clenching, their toes curling, their arm reaching out as if it's still there. Others feel burning, crushing, or stabbing, ghost pain in a limb that no longer exists. The mind isn't pretending. The body is still wired. This happens because the brain holds a map of the body called the somatosensory cortex, a precise layout of every part of your form, organized by nerve input. When a limb is amputated, the brain doesn't erase its presence. Instead, it keeps trying to reach it. It sends signals into the void, expecting feedback, and when none comes, it creates the sensation itself. The echo becomes a voice. The absence becomes a presence. Sometimes, neighboring areas in the brain's map get confused. A person might feel a phantom hand when their cheek is touched, or a missing foot when their thigh is brushed. The brain is reorganizing its map, but imperfectly, desperately trying to make sense of loss. It doesn't register absence, only disrupted input, and so it fills in the blanks, even if it means creating pain where there is no body. For some, the pain is unbearable. They clench a hand they can't see. They scream from a burn they can't treat. But the treatment often doesn't lie in the body. It lies in the brain. One of the most fascinating tools used is the mirror box. A person places their intact limb into one side, its reflection appearing where the missing limb would be. When they move the intact limb, the brain sees the reflection and believes the phantom is moving too. Pain subsides. The illusion rewrites the signal. Phantom limb sensation is more than a medical curiosity. It's a revelation. It proves that the body isn't just in the body, it's in the mind's image of the body. And even when a part of you is physically gone, the brain holds on, sometimes with comfort, sometimes with agony, but always with memory, because in the brain's eyes, nothing ever fully disappears. The brain shuts off certain moral areas when justifying violence. When a person commits harm but believes it's justified, when violence is wrapped in righteousness, revenge, or necessity, the brain doesn't just rationalize it, it rewires itself in real time. Key areas responsible for empathy and moral reasoning dim, go silent, or disconnect entirely. The act remains, but the guilt is muted. The violence happens, but the remorse doesn't echo, not because the person is evil, but because the brain, when protecting a belief, knows how to make morality disappear. Neuroscientists have found that when people engage in violence they believe is just, activity in the medial prefrontal cortex and the temporoparietal junction, regions tied to empathy, theory of mind, and moral judgment, drops sharply. These are the same regions that light up when witnessing someone in pain or considering the feelings of others. But in the heat of righteous anger or tribal loyalty, they go dark. This mechanism is evolutionary. In ancient times, survival often depended on loyalty to a group and the willingness to fight for it. To hesitate, to feel empathy for the enemy, could mean death. So, the brain developed a shortcut. Turn off compassion when the violence feels justified. Kill the threat, not the conscience. Modern violence follows the same rule. When people dehumanize others through labels, ideologies, or narratives, the brain stops treating them as full humans, soldiers in war zones, zealots in ideological conflict, abusers who believe their victims deserved it. The justifications act like switches. They don't just alter thoughts, they suppress the neurological pathways that make us care. This is why genocides happen not in sudden rage, but in slow erosion of empathy. Why mobs commit atrocities while chanting slogans. The moral self doesn't vanish, it's simply overridden, switched off to preserve the illusion of rightness. And afterward, many don't feel remorse, not because they can't, but because their brains, in the moment of violence, rewrote the emotional map. They remember the act, but not the weight. And even if they do feel it later, it arrives like a faint echo, delayed, distorted, haunting. This truth is terrifying because it shows how fragile morality is. It isn't fixed. It's situational, neurological, interruptible. The brain is not a moral compass. It's a survival machine. And when belief demands blood, it knows how to silence the voice that says, stop. When you walk through a door, the brain often resets working memory. You walk into a room and forget why. The thought was just there, alive in your mind, a task, a question, a reason for moving. But the moment you cross the threshold, it vanishes, gone, like it never existed. This isn't clumsiness or distraction. It's a glitch in the brain's architecture, a quiet reset switch that flips the moment you walk through a door. Psychologists call this the doorway effect, the strange and universal phenomenon where passing from one room to another causes the brain to wipe or scramble your short-term intentions, your working memory. The space where you hold temporary thoughts and to-do items gets disrupted, not because you're overwhelmed, but because your brain assumes new place, new context. Start fresh. The brain is constantly filtering and chunking reality into scenes, frames of experience. When you change environments, like moving from the kitchen to the bedroom, It treats that moment like the end of one scene and the beginning of another, and just like a new scene in a film, the previous one fades into the background. Whatever you were mentally holding on to, grab the keys, send the message, look for the charger, is treated as no longer relevant. It's filed away, even if it's not finished. This mechanism isn't a flaw, it's efficiency. The brain is optimized for survival, not perfect memory. In an unfamiliar or new space, it reallocates resources to scan for changes, threats, opportunities. The old plan is sacrificed for the new environment. The cost? You stand there, blank, retracing your steps like a detective, chasing the ghost of a thought. What's even more fascinating is that the effect can happen virtually. In simulations or video games, moving through digital doors can still trigger memory lapses. The brain doesn't need real walls, just the suggestion of transition. It's as if the act of entering something new, in any form, tells your mind, clear the board. But sometimes retracing your steps really works. By walking back to the place where the thought first occurred, your brain reactivates that scene, reloading the mental file you were using. The memory, it turns out, was never lost. It was just stored in the last room. Because to the mind, a door isn't just an opening. It's a boundary between what matters now and what mattered before. And once you cross it, your brain quietly asks, are we still the same person we were on the other side? Stress can shrink parts of your brain and grow others. Chronic stress doesn't just weigh on the mind, it reshapes it. It changes the physical architecture of your brain, pruning some regions like withered branches and thickening others like wild, overgrown roots. This isn't poetic metaphor, it's literal transformation. Under prolonged stress, the brain rewires itself in ways that can make anxiety, reactivity, and fear not just emotional states, but structural realities. One of the most affected areas is the hippocampus, the region responsible for learning, memory, and emotional regulation. When stress hormones like cortisol flood the system day after day, the hippocampus begins to shrink. Neurons lose their connections, memory falters, focus slips, emotional balance becomes harder to hold. People forget words, forget where they put things. They don't feel like themselves, and in many ways, they aren't. Their brains have changed. But while the hippocampus shrinks, the amygdala, the brain's fear center, can grow. It becomes more sensitive, more reactive, more easily triggered. This is why small problems start to feel overwhelming, why arguments escalate faster, why the world seems sharper, louder, more hostile. The brain becomes a threat detector on high alert, tuned to anticipate danger even when none is there. And in this rewiring, a dangerous loop forms. The more the amygdala grows, the more stress is perceived. The more stress is perceived, the more cortisol is released. The more cortisol, the more the hippocampus erodes, and the more power the amygdala gains. The brain becomes stuck in a cycle where fear breeds fear, and clarity drowns in noise. Even the prefrontal cortex, the seat of rational thinking and impulse control, begins to dim under stress. This is why it's harder to make decisions when overwhelmed, why people act impulsively, say things they regret, or shut down entirely. It's not because they're weak, it's because the very part of their brain that regulates behavior is being suppressed. Yet the brain isn't broken, it's adapting, it's trying to protect you, to survive. But in the modern world, where threats aren't saber-toothed tigers, but deadlines, debts, and disconnection, that adaptation becomes maladaptive. The haunting truth? Stress doesn't just change how you feel, it changes who you are. And unless the pressure is released, the brain continues to reshape itself, not in the image of peace, but in the architecture of survival. The mind prefers consistency over truth. The mind does not chase truth the way it claims to. It chases comfort, coherence, the illusion that the world makes sense and that you make sense within it. If truth fits into that illusion, it's welcomed. If not, the mind quietly edits it, bends it, or ignores it altogether. Because between what is true and what is familiar, the mind almost always chooses familiarity. It craves consistency, not reality. This is the root of cognitive dissonance, the psychological discomfort that arises when a truth contradicts a long-held belief. The brain doesn't react neutrally. It panics. That contradiction isn't just an intellectual problem. It's a threat. So the mind scrambles to resolve the tension, not by accepting the truth, but by protecting the consistency. It twists facts, rewrites memories, builds excuses, questions sources, not to deceive others, to preserve the self. This is why people defend beliefs even after they've been proven false. Why someone will cling to a bad relationship, a toxic habit, or a broken system, because changing their mind would mean admitting they were wrong, that they wasted time, that the story they built their identity on wasn't real, and the mind would rather double down on the lie than feel that collapse. The preference for consistency is ancient. For early humans, a stable worldview meant survival. Beliefs that fit together helped predict the environment, assess threats, choose alliances. A mind constantly updating itself with conflicting truths would have been overwhelmed. So evolution favored stability over accuracy, predictability over fact. Even now, this wiring shapes how people absorb new information. Confirmation bias filters what we see, hear, and remember, favoring anything that aligns with what we already believe. Contradictions get minimized or forgotten. Agreeable ideas feel like discoveries. Disagreeable truths feel like attacks. Socially, this shows up in tribalism, in echo chambers, in loyalty to ideologies that offer certainty, even if they distort reality. The group's belief system becomes a shield, and challenging it feels like betrayal, not just of others, but of yourself. Because consistency isn't just mental, it becomes emotional, cultural, existential. But there's a cost. When truth threatens consistency and consistency wins, growth stops. Insight withers. Whole lives can be spent defending falsehoods simply because they feel safe, because they fit. And yet, the mind that dares to choose truth over comfort, even once, starts to see the cracks in the illusion. It feels terrifying. But it's also the beginning of real freedom, because truth may be messy, but it's alive, and it doesn't need to fit the story. It is the story, if you're brave enough to let the old one break. Your heartbeat affects decision-making. Beneath every choice, every hesitation, every gut feeling, there's a rhythm pulsing quietly in the background, your heartbeat. And it's not just a background drum, it's an influencer, a signal, a subtle force shaping what you think, what you feel, and what you choose. The shocking truth is this: the timing of your heartbeat can alter your judgment, your perception of risk, even your sense of fear, and most of the time, you don't even notice. This strange connection begins with something called cardiac afferent signals, electrical messages sent from the heart to the brain. These messages rise and fall with each beat, and they don't just regulate blood pressure. They modulate awareness, emotion, and cognition. At the peak of the heartbeat, when pressure inside the arteries is highest, the brain becomes more sensitive to threat. You're more likely to perceive something as dangerous, more likely to feel startled, more likely to react defensively, even if nothing is actually wrong. In one experiment, people were shown images of fearful faces synced to either the peak or trough of their heartbeat. When the images appeared at the peak, participants judged them as more threatening and more emotionally intense. The same face, shown at a different moment in the cardiac cycle, didn't spark the same response. The beat of the heart changed the interpretation of the world. This goes deeper than fear. Studies have shown that the brain's interoceptive network, the system that senses the body's internal state, is closely tied to decision-making under uncertainty. People who are more attuned to their heartbeat tend to make better decisions in complex environments like poker or high-stakes negotiations. It's not magic, it's internal data. The body is providing emotional signals, tiny tremors of excitement, dread, or confidence that the brain reads like whispers from below consciousness. But it's not always accurate. If the heart is racing from stress, the brain may overestimate danger. If it's calm, risk might feel smaller than it is. The body becomes a lens through which the mind evaluates everything. A heartbeat becomes not just a pulse, but a compass, guiding decisions with every thump. And here's the haunting part. This influence is constant. You don't decide whether your heartbeat affects your thinking. It already does. Every moment, every beat, every choice, shaped by a rhythm that began before you could speak and will continue until the very last decision you ever make. Some people see time as spatial, like a calendar laid out in 3D. For most, time flows invisibly, one moment after the next, slipping forward in a straight, intangible line. But for others, time is something they see, not metaphorically, literally. Days, months, even decades stretch out before them like a map, a spiral, a looped ribbon floating in three-dimensional space. This rare and astonishing way of experiencing time is called time-space synesthesia, and it reshapes how the mind navigates memory, future, and identity. People with this condition don't imagine calendars, they inhabit them. A week might curve around their body like a horseshoe. A year might spiral outward, January hovering to their left, July floating behind their shoulder, December glowing just out in front. Some see the timeline as vertical, with days stacked above and below. Others see it as circular, moving clockwise or counterclockwise. It's different for each person, but always vivid, always consistent, like a mental room they never leave. This isn't a fantasy. It's not learned. It emerges uninvited, usually in early childhood, and it remains a part of perception for life. Just as someone instinctively knows where their limbs are without looking, people with time-space synesthesia know where Thursday is, or where the year 1999 sits in relation to 2025. They can turn mentally to look behind them at last month. They can walk toward the future. Their brain doesn't just track time, it spatializes it. Neuroscientists believe this comes from cross-activation between brain regions responsible for spatial awareness and temporal processing. In most people, time is abstract, but in the synesthetic brain, these concepts merge, creating a lived geometry of time. It's not imagination layered onto experience, it is the experience. This perception often comes with striking benefits. People with spatial time awareness tend to have exceptional autobiographical memory. They can recall events with precise date placement because each memory is tied to a visual coordinate. Planning the future feels like moving physical pieces into place. Time becomes tangible, navigable, something they can walk through. But it can also be disorienting. Time is ever present,